I think that in general, streaming music is just so much better than the old way of getting music. You gotta go all the way to the store. You drop 20 bucks or more on an album that you don't even know is gonna have more than 1 or 2 good songs. But now I just go on like Spotify or something and be like, this sucks, next band, this sucks, next band, this sucks, next band, oh, okay, here we go. Or, use the algorithms that have actually gotten pretty good at identifying what I'm gonna like based on my past taste. That being said though, there is something that I sort of miss from those days. That sense of mystery and discovery. Picking something out just because the art stood out to you on the shelf. Whether it be cool art, unique, goofy. I think at the time I saw Razor's album Shotgun Justice. With art that looks like something an edgy 14-year-old drew on a notebook. Looking like an AOL Antagonist Inc. character portrait. With a smiley face for abs. Then it turned out that the album was actually really good. And then you get to an indie record store and you might find something even more obscure. A foreign release or a rare bootleg from a band you liked. Some CD that a local band spent all their pay from Sam Goody to make. Or maybe, some album that nobody has an idea what it is. Well, as one 4chan poster discovered, that sense of mystery is alive and well at your local thrift store. It was in 2014 that they came across a strange disc with the face of an anime girl. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the story of Panchiko Death Metal. This video is sponsored by Raycon. There's this one restaurant that I like to go to after the gym. The food's great, but I don't know what it is about that spot. It seems like every time I go there, there's always someone that's just open mouth chewing so loud, like louder than the TV or anything else going on in there. Makes me want to stab myself in the ear like Kakihara from Ichi the Killer. But instead, I put in my Raycon everyday earbuds. Turn on the noise isolation, put on a little Cannibal Corpse, and there you go, lunch is saved. I use my Raycon earbuds basically every day when I'm going on walks, and their optimized gel tips make sure they're comfortable and stay in your ears, even when you're running. Like any serious love story, your Raycons are here for a good time and a long time, with 8 hours of playtime and a 32-hour battery life. Most importantly, you get amazing quality audio at half the price of other premium audio brands. And Raycon's everyday earbuds are used to feeling the love. They've already gotten tens of thousands of 5-star reviews. Just click the link in the description or go to buyraycon.com/wang. You'll get 15% off your Raycon purchase plus free shipping. This is probably one of the most requested lost media stories for me to cover, and in the time since people started requesting it and now, it's no longer lost media. But let's go back to the start of the mystery. The story begins on a post on 4chan's music board in 2014. On July 21st, an anonymous user made a thread looking for information on a CD they had just purchased from a thrift store. It was entitled Death Metal and by a band called Panchiko. The disc contained only 4 tracks lasting under 19 minutes. He recalled its unique cover had caught his eye, giving the impression of noise pop or vaporwave. Instead, he found that it was more akin to a lo-fi shoegaze. Because, with a title like Death Metal, that's of course what it would be. Intrigued, he searched for more information about this album online, but he was unable to find a trace of its existence at all. Hey, I picked this up because it looked interesting. I wasn't able to find any references to it online whatsoever. Even with super obscure bands, you might expect to find an old MySpace page or mention in some forum. Does anybody recognize the album? This isn't some viral marketing bullshit. I'm just curious if anyone could shed some light on it, and I'm slightly excited by the prospect of owning a rare album. Immediately, people began asking for a rip so they could listen to it themselves, and OP obliged. Evidently, they quickly fell in love with this album, with the first response calling it a masterpiece. And as a result, they are now invested in learning more about this project. At least most of them were. One of them remarked that it was horrible, and it sounded like something someone who visits Mew would make. In agreement, another replied, it's almost like he used random art he found to push his shitty album. Even early on, there was a lot of suspicion that this was a publicity stunt, but we'll go more into that later on. For those who believed in its legitimacy, there were a lot of unanswered questions. Where did this drawing on the album come from? Was the band's name related to Pachinko? But the most pressing mystery lied in the music itself. Before the upload finished, the OP mentioned that it sounded badly recorded. He described a consistent noise panning back and forth throughout the EP. This would become a point of debate over whether or not this was intentional. Okay, I think I'm going crazy. This sounds like the CD wasn't properly burned or is a weird dithering algorithm. Maybe the noise isn't supposed to be there. In response, the OP insisted they were wrong. I think it's definitely supposed to be there. No way that would happen with 2000s technology. This date comes from the CD's liner notes, which he'd attached in an Imager album. It also credits the band's members, but unfortunately, in a move reminiscent of the Resident Evil 1 end credits, only their first names: Owain, Andy, Sean, and John. The only other clue came from the original poster. The CD had a sticker revealing that it had been purchased from Oxfam, a chain that only exists in the United Kingdom. So it was made in the UK by 4 people with very common first names. So not really much to go on. Shortly after, the OP disappeared and even deleted the photos he'd uploaded. So it wasn't long until the thread went inactive and expired. But the story of this mysterious album didn't die with it. Death metal continued to spread across the internet, passed around on various file sharing sites. And there were a few minor discoveries over the years. The art was sourced to a manga named Mint na Bokura. It ran from May of 1997 to December of 1999, which didn't contradict the CD's original copyright. Still, many people remained convinced that this was nothing more than an elaborate hoax. People were adamant that such degradation wasn't possible. Take, for example, this commenter from a Reddit thread about the subject. I'm dubious about the disk rot. A heavily damaged CD would play with a lot of skips as the player tries to read the data and fails to do so. Or it would simply not play if the table of contents is damaged. The noise seems to have been laid over the original audio. In case you're wondering, and I was actually surprised to find this out too, they're wrong about that. There are countless examples online of degradation from CDs found in similar quality. Of course, that didn't stop people from endlessly arguing about whether or not disk rot was a thing. But there were no actual developments until it was reposted to YouTube in August of 2019. The uploader wrote about its mystique in the description, even linking to the 4chan archive. It accumulated tens of thousands of views, exposing many to the mystery for the first time. Eventually, enough became interested that they formed a dedicated search effort. Their goal was to find a clean copy of this album and perhaps even other work the band had made. And just 1 month later, a Discord was created to document the information about the album. Their main lead at the time was from the original discussion. You see, while discussing Oxfam, one Anon mentioned that they had actually seen it there before. They specifically recalled it being at a location in Southampton. The searchers emailed that specific shop, only for staff to deny ever having had it in stock. But that didn't discourage them, instead exhausting the lead to its fullest extent. They began contacting every single musician in the area that shared a first name with the band. Unfortunately, this was also in vain. Every single musician they contacted either claimed to have no involvement in the project or just never responded at all. It all seemed hopeless, with many just contemplating throwing in the towel. But there's still one clue left that had gone largely unnoticed. The original post's image showed a blurry but still legible barcode on the CD. This, as it turns out, was not an ID for the item. Rather, it was for the person who gifted it. That meant that it was a direct lead to someone else who had physically possessed this album. It seemed promising, but there were already some immediate setbacks. It was already unlikely for Oxfam to have this information on record after such a long time. But even if they did have it, they're not just gonna dox the person who gave them a CD. That would be very illegal due to UK privacy laws. And because of that, it was presumed a dead end and abandoned. That is, until January of 2020, when one user took a second look and inadvertently cracked the entire case wide open. By looking up Oxfam along with the last 4 digits, he found references to a location in Sherwood, Nottingham. This didn't shift their ability to get information about the code, because all the same laws still apply, but it allowed the team to shift efforts to that area. And as a typical shot in the dark, one person sent a message to an Owain they found living in Nottingham. The Facebook profile appeared abandoned, but showed he had a background in music. Still, they could have never predicted that this actually was Owain, the lead singer of Panchico. And Owain, of course, was apprehensive at first. I mean, it's a pretty natural response to a random stranger on the internet asking you about a project you'd abandoned 2 decades ago. But once he realized it wasn't a joke, he confirmed that he was indeed the Owain who sung on death metal. The fan went on to explain that this album had gained a cult following online and people were desperate to get a clean copy of this recording. Shocked, he immediately reached out to the other members of Panchico. The following is an excerpt from Vice in which he recalls the conversations. "Have you seen this?" he wrote to Andy, who was with his girlfriend in Korea at the time. Andy was just like, "Bloody hell. We couldn't believe it," remembers Owain. Sean, who is now living in Cambridge, was next up. They lost touch with John years before. He was equally stunned. I hadn't listened to it for 20 years, Sean admits, but when I heard the track again, I was actually pleasantly surprised. The three men had long since abandoned their dreams of becoming famous musicians. Andy was the only one with a career in music at all, having become a sound engineer. Owain briefly pursued other artistic projects before moving on to education, and Sean the bassist became a tree surgeon. In a message posted on January 21st, the group confirmed that Owain had been contacted. He confirmed to them that the distortion wasn't intentional, but then in a surprise twist, revealed that they had no intentions of releasing a clean copy. This is because, as it turns out, they didn't have any. You see, Panchico was made of childhood friends, and death metal was recorded while they were still in high school. This meant that they had little to no money and were forced to use cheap low-end equipment, which partially explains why the CD had deteriorated so much. Only 30 copies were ever made and mostly just sent to journalists and record labels. Nobody responded, so after a second EP with similar results, they threw in the towel. By 2020, none of the original members had any copy of the CD. Andy, who had produced the CD, even found that the original masters had vanished, so it was somewhat of a bittersweet victory. They'd solved the mystery behind the band, but all hope of getting a clean copy of death metal was lost. That is, until February 3rd. By pure coincidence, one of Andy's friends managed to uncover a then-forgotten copy of the EP. This was in far better condition, having little to no disc rot, and because of this, Andy was able to transfer the CD and remaster the project. He also managed to find a copy of the band's second EP, Kicking Cars, which hadn't surfaced online, and he decided to give it the same treatment so that it could be included alongside the original tracklist. The process took less than 2 weeks, with the remastered version releasing on February 16th of 2020. Death metal was, for the first time ever, publicly accessible in its intended quality. And you might think the story would end there, but there's actually still so much more to it. Within hours, it was downloaded so many times that it was one of the best-selling albums on Bandcamp that day. And shortly after, it was put on streaming services where it garnered an even larger audience, with most unaware of its backstory. And they've only grown exponentially since, with over 600,000 monthly listeners at the time of this recording. And because of this newfound success, they've reformed as a band and even begun recording new music. In 2021, Panchico released their first single in over 20 years. Months later, they performed their first live show. And now they're doing international tours around the world. I'm actually going to be seeing them at Sick New World, which has one of the most chaotic mixes of bands I've ever seen. It's honestly fascinating how this story played out. In just a slightly different timeline, that OP never purchased that CD or posted about it online. But because he did, now these childhood friends are back together again and playing music in front of crowds. Now before I end this video, there is something else interesting that I'd like to point out. In a lot of those early interactions, the band was conflicted about their newfound popularity. They would say stuff like, "The past is the past." And to this day, they prefer the disc rot version of the album. To them, it was a relic of their teenage years, and so they found symbolism in its degradation. Owain elaborates on this in a message he sent early on. Now, what I find interesting is, after listening to many videos on YouTube about the EP, I feel that the degradation of the CD is actually part of the music now. It is a part of why people enjoy the music, and whilst I try to look for an original copy, I feel like it may take something away from what people found in the music. Maybe it's best left how people found it as this interesting half-destroyed piece of music from far gone era. I think it's part of what makes it charming today, and that's what people should hold on to and enjoy about the CD. It's an interesting interpretation, especially coming from the artists themselves. And when you think about how many different things had to align for this to happen, it's kind of beautiful in a way. And because of this, I'd like to recommend anyone who likes death metal to check out the original rip at least once. Maybe it'll change your view on the album, or maybe it'll just hurt your ears. Listen, I know a lot of you guys are total weeaboos, which means that the odds are that for a lot of you watching, there's nothing more that you would love than to have your own anime waifu. The 2D girls, they do what the 3D girls simply can't. But there you are, stuck here in your flesh prison. So there's not all that much you can do about it except draw some doodles and get paper cuts. But somewhere out there, someone was living your dream. And that someone was a penguin. A Humboldt penguin in Japan named Grape-Kun. It's the greatest love story ever told, but it's not one without heartbreak and tragedy. So sit back while I tell you the story of Grape-Kun, the penguin with an anime waifu. In April 16th, 1996, the Hamura Zoo in Tokyo, Japan had a new arrival. A new baby Humboldt penguin. When he was born, he was identified only by the purple ring they put on his wing to identify him, so they gave him the name Grape-Kun. Humboldt penguins, which are a species native to South America, particularly Chile, could be like humans in a lot of ways, particularly when it comes to their relationships with other penguins. One day at the Hamura Zoo, Grape-Kun meets a female penguin named Midori, and his behavior is unmistakable. He bows his head and exchanges glances with her. He extends his head up, opens up his wings, and lets out a call. She reciprocates, and thus, now Grape-Kun and Midori are a couple. Humboldt penguins tend to be monogamous. When they find a partner, that's their partner for life, and Midori was Grape-Kun's partner for life. And unlike a lot of other zoo animals, they even got to travel together. In 2006, the Tobu Zoo completed their new penguin enclosure. But you can't have a penguin enclosure without penguins, so arrangements were made for some of the penguins from the Hamura Zoo to go to the Tobu Zoo. Grape-Kun and Midori being among the penguins making the move. And at first things are going great. Grape-Kun and Midori are adapting to their new surroundings, and they even have a son together named Hanpen. But here's where things start to go south. Hanpen was sent to the Edogawa Zoo to be raised by a foster mother. They never even got to see their chick, and this was a move made to prevent inbreeding. Although ironically, Hanpen would wind up mating with his foster mother. I guess he had 2 broken wings. There's no way to know for sure, but some have theorized that the separation from their chick had damaged the relationship between Grape-Kun and Midori. But what really sealed the deal is what happened later in 2010. In 2010, Grape-Kun got sick, and for the duration of his treatment, he had to be separated from the other penguins at the zoo, including Midori. But the treatment is a success, and Grape-Kun has a long life ahead of him, and they return him to the enclosure. But when he comes back, something's changed. He returns to find that Midori has moved on with another male penguin, a younger male penguin named Denka. And in addition to finding that what was supposed to be his lifelong mate had abandoned him for a younger male, the rest of the flock also began to shun him. Once again, there's no way to know for sure what the penguins were thinking, but it's possible that this was because when he was taken away, they had believed he had died. So there Grape-Kun was, stuck alone with all these other penguins who no longer wanted anything to do with him. Midori and Denka would have a chick of their own named Beer. This chick would not be sent to another zoo, but instead live in the enclosure with all of them. So for Grape-Kun, it would be 7 long years watching all the other penguins around him happily live their lives, while he sat there abandoned and alone. Every day, a reminder of the life he used to have and how things were supposed to be. But in April of 2017, everything would change. It was at this time that zoos across Japan began a collaboration with the anime series Kemono Friends. Kemono Friends tells the story of Japari Park, a zoo containing all different kinds of rare, legendary, and mysterious animals. And some of these animals become transformed into human versions of themselves, or friends. The series was a runaway hit beyond anyone's expectations, and it was believed that because of the show's popularity, the collaborations with the zoos would increase awareness about the animals and also bring more visitors to the zoos. And Grape-Kun's home, the Tobu Zoo, would be one of these zoos. So for the collaboration, cardboard standees of the characters from the show would be placed all around the zoo. And in the Humboldt penguin enclosure, the Humboldt penguin character Fururu would make her home. From the very first day of the collaboration, visitors would notice the penguin staring at the anime girl. Noticing how much attention the penguin started to get, the zoo began to post about him and giving a little bit more of his story. His name is Grape-Kun. He's 20 years old, an old man in penguin years. He really likes her. Now, of course, it's really easy to sit there and look at animals behaving a certain way and you got this urge to anthropomorphize them. But these observations, a lot of times, are just us recognizing patterns that aren't really there and don't necessarily reflect what's actually going on in the mind of the animal. But what would happen next would be unmistakable. One day, while looking at Fururu, Grape-Kun would extend his neck up, stretch his wings out, and make a call. In other words, he was very clearly trying to court this anime waifu. Surely this was an absolutely baffling event for the staff to witness. But perhaps it was a welcome one for a penguin that was known to have such a sad past. So as this story spreads, the internet becomes obsessed with the weeb penguin with the anime waifu. All kinds of articles are being written about him, tons of fan art being drawn, and even the people behind the show are getting in on the fun, with Fururu's voice actress going to meet Grape-Kun in person. Although, if we judge by the green line analysis, the 3D woman was simply no match for the 2D woman. But then, tragedy strikes. A troubling image surfaces of Grape-Kun stuck behind the fence, separated from his love. Look at my man in penguin jail over here, imprisoned for the victimless crime of falling in love with an anime girl. Rumors began to spread that he had become so enamored with the cardboard standee that he stopped eating, which of course would lead to the worst people on the planet, the internet armchair veterinarians, to talk about how this is actually animal abuse for them to have the cardboard cutout there. But people began to think that he was put behind the fence so he didn't starve to death and they could feed him. The zoo would later clarify that he was eating just fine and the fence was put there so he wouldn't accidentally fall into the pool at closing. At other times, he was free to stare at his waifu to his heart's content. So for the internet armchair vets there, suck it, he was fine. So the collaboration between Kimono Friends and the zoos turns out to be a big success. Visitor counts are rising all over the place, especially at this zoo with people going from all over the place to come see Grape-Kun. He had become a massive attraction with exhibits made just to spotlight him. But eventually, the promotion would come to an end. And what this meant is all of the cardboard standees around the zoo would have to be removed. What did this mean for Grape-Kun? What would happen to Fururu? Would she be removed? Would Grape-Kun be abandoned yet again? Ultimately, it was decided it would be best if she remained there indefinitely even after the collaboration ended. And from that point on, they would only be separated one time. In the middle of September, the zoo staff became concerned that a coming typhoon might blow away the standee or destroy it. So they took her away for safekeeping, leading to one of the saddest images to come out of this entire ordeal. Look at that. His shoulders are slumped and he's just watching his waifu get taken away. Maybe forever, he doesn't know. But of course that's better than the alternative where she potentially gets blown away or destroyed and he never sees her again. But of course she would be returned to the enclosure after the weather improved. I don't like that bitch Midori. Grape-Kun didn't forget about her. You know, it's kind of funny to think though, how through this story, there's definitely a lot of people who came to legitimately hate a penguin. And you do have to remind yourself that even though we're seeing all these human characteristics in the animals, it is still just an animal. You can't really get mad at her. And after all, as it turns out, 1/3 of female Humboldt penguins cheat on their mates. It's just the way it is, and don't even get me started on the penguin prostitution rings. So with his anime waifu returned to the enclosure, and with Grape-Kun still as popular as ever, on October 9th, the Tobu Zoo announced a 2-week special event celebrating him, the Autumn Grape Festival, which would be held that November. This turned out to be a case of some of the worst timing ever, because the next day, the zoo would share some bad news. Notice of cancellation of Grape-Kun exhibition due to changes in physical condition of Grape-Kun. We will cancel the exhibition from today. Fururu also moved with Grape. We apologized for any inconvenience. They announced that that day's Grape-Kun exhibition had been cancelled due to unexplained weight loss. But they did bring his waifu with him while he monitored his condition so he wouldn't be alone through the experience. Get well soon messages poured in and people were hoping for the best. But Humboldt penguins rarely live past 20 years old and Grape-Kun was already 21 years old. And sure enough, the next day, the Tobu Zoo reported that Grape had passed away peacefully with his anime waifu Fururu by his side. Several pieces of fan art were made of Grape venturing off into the afterlife with his waifu. The zoo even set up a shrine where people could come pay their respects in person. And Mine Yoshizaki, the character designer for Kimono Friends, would gift an illustration to the zoo depicting Grape-Kun and Fururu together, with her now wearing a purple armband just like Grape. The standee of Fururu in the penguin enclosure has now been replaced by this art of Grape and Fururu together. In the grand scheme of things, Grape-Kun and his anime waifu weren't together all that long, just half a year or so. A life longer and full of more hardship than the average penguin. He got the happy ending that so rarely happens in real life. And the story still continues to this day. The standee of Grape-Kun and Fururu has attracted attention once more. Now, from a young penguin named Nei-kun. Look at him try to get up on that rock. Who knows what his intentions are? Perhaps he wants to steal food away like that bastard penguin Denka? Or maybe, he's just a penguin and he wants to peck at the cardboard a little. But in any case, that is the legend of Grape-Kun. Working at an office could be a monotonous, soul-draining way to spend 40 hours or more of your week. But for a lot of people, it's a necessary evil if, you like to do things like eat food and live indoors. It's even more tedious if you go back to the days before ping pong table and Taco Tuesday style offices. The stuff you see on TikTok that looks like adult daycare. If you want to hold on to your sanity, you gotta find little things to break up the routine and experience just a little bit of joy. And what better way than with a good old-fashioned office prank? The thing is though, while on TV, Jim Halpert can inflict endless amounts of psychological warfare upon his likely autistic coworker.
Identity theft is not a joke, Jim.
It's not always like that in real life. Take, for example, the story of a Canadian Redditor's office prank that leads to the Mounties getting involved, and leads to a person almost dying. How did a simple office prank spiral this badly out of control? Let's find out in this episode of Tales from the Internet. Today's story was voted 2013's Fuck Up of the Year on r/TIFU. So you're probably expecting some kind of bodily fluids, some kind of weird sex stuff, some fashion of gross regret. Well, this story has none of that. But I don't think I've ever seen something so seemingly innocent spiral so badly out of control. On May 28th of 2013, a user named Into the Wilder posts, TIFU by playing a Think Geek practical joke. The Canadian FBI was called and I nearly killed my 7-year career. I work as a loans officer in a rural branch of a small Canadian bank. Sorry for your suddenly sodden panties, ladies. As the intro might imply, this man is not exactly in love with his job. He explains that after losing his old job selling computers in his early 20s, he kinda just fell into this position. And unfortunately, he wound up actually being pretty good at it. He says that although he is well liked by the rest of the staff, his sense of humor doesn't really fit in with the rest of theirs, which has been a pretty frustrating thing for him and is ultimately what makes this turn into a big debacle. He also brings up his love of Think Geek. Now currently, Think Geek is a barely existent subsidiary of GameStop. If it ever has anything stocked at all, it's junk like off-brand chargers and earbuds. And at the time just before that, it's mostly just Funko Pops and pop culture merch tie-ins like Funko Pops. And while that was always a part of the brand, the further back you go, the more the focus was on things like weird toys and gizmos and gadgets. It was kind of like a throwback to those Johnson Smith things you never knew existed catalogs, but with a modern twist. Even just thinking about those catalogs made me stop working on this video for a couple hours, just look through old catalogs. Like where else are you gonna find Billy Bob teeth, a demonic possessed hand, and a freaky flashing eye sunglasses all in one place? But back to Think Geek. Browsing the site back in the day was that kind of vibe, and Into the Wilder liked to decorate his office space with stuff from Think Geek. Examples he gave were the Conan the Barbarian letter opener, a Salvador Dali melting clock, and a magnetic levitating globe. He was constantly buying weird little knickknacks from the site, so come Christmas time, he's a pretty easy guy to shop for. And that year for Christmas, and the Christmas before the incident, his family got him one of the gadgets from that site that I've probably thought about more than any other one, the annoy-a-tron. The annoy-a-tron, if you're not familiar, is a little prank device. There are a few different iterations of it over the years with a few different sound effects it has, but the core concept is always the same. It's a tiny little electronic device that you hide somewhere. To compare it to a quarter for scale. And every few minutes, set at an interval that you choose, it lets out a tiny, barely audible beep. I imagine that most of you have encountered something like this over the years from a normal non-prank device. Like a carbon monoxide detector, or a washing machine, something. So you know how maddening it can be with those devices that are way more obvious and easy to find. So imagine that with a device that's specifically designed to be annoying and hard to find, with a 3-month battery life. And then as somebody finally finds it, they got this weird little circuit board. They're left wondering what purpose it serves. By removing it, did you just break some crucial component of the office? People are going to lose their minds over this, but in a way that's ultimately pretty harmless. Or should be pretty harmless. So after thinking about it for a bit, he finally comes up with the perfect hiding spot for his annoy-a-tron. I came in early on a Monday and placed it behind a metal poster frame hanging on the wall in the office of one of my coworkers. I flipped the on switch and went blithely about my day, waiting for a reaction and to share a few chuckles. Considering he felt comfortable enough to go into this specific person's office and hide the annoy-a-tron, it was presumably one of the people there he had a better relationship with. So not much could go terribly wrong. You just go, gotcha, with your office buddy and go on with your day. But it doesn't seem to be going as planned. Monday came and went. Nothing. Tuesday. Nothing. Wednesday and Thursday. Not a peep. At that point, I figured it was broken. Frankly, I kind of forgot about it. I had Friday off, and I suppose I would have checked it when I got back the following week. As the kind of person who double checks everything a million times, I'm kind of surprised he resists the urge to go back to the office and check the poster just to make sure he really did turn it on. You know, thereby risking incriminating himself. But he didn't do it. The long weekend comes and goes, and he shows up to work as usual on Monday. When everyone gets there, all 16 workers are called into the manager's office. They're gonna have an unscheduled conference call with the VP. At this point, Into the Wilder isn't really thinking much of it, just gonna be some kind of formality that probably could have been an email, a waste of time, but something you gotta do when you work at an office. So the manager calls the district VP, who then introduces the head of security. And at that point, Into the Wilder starts to realize that this isn't a normal conference call. By now, the VP says, some of you know about the device that was found at your branch last week. Device? What the hell? What kind of device could they possibly be talking? Oh, holy Jesus fuck nuggets. When it was found on Thursday, nobody knew what it was, so it was brought to the branch manager, who then sent pictures of the device to me. Fuck. So the district VP forwards the pictures of the device to the head of security. The head of security isn't sure what this could be, but he suspects that it might be a listening device. But since he wasn't sure, he sends the pictures to the Canadian Security Intelligence Services, as well as the RCMP, aka the Mounties. As you may be aware, the Mountie always gets his man. Into the Wilder suddenly realizes the degree to which he is fucked. And it gets worse. The Canadian feds suspect that the little annoy-a-tron might be a bomb. So over the weekend, all the staff were told to stay home, and while they were gone, investigators swept the building to make sure that there were no more such devices hidden around. At this point, hearing all this, Into the Wilder is panicking. What's he gonna do? And really, what do you do? My opinion, keep it to yourself. I mean, at this point, you got the feds involved, you got the Mounties involved. They haven't gathered everyone in the office for a big dramatic reveal. You've made it this far, they probably have no idea that you're the one that put this behind that poster. And if they don't know by now, they probably never will. Just keep your mouth shut and you'll go away. So here's what he does. If I had sat down ahead of time to brainstorm a worst case scenario, I wouldn't have even come close to this epic corporate craptastrophe. I had no choice. I took a shaky breath, steeled my nerve, clenched my ass cheeks tight, and tried to say, excuse me, but choked out a pubescent squeak instead. I cleared my throat, interrupted the conference call in that stuffy room full of my coworkers and spoke up, telling them it's a harmless noisemaker, taking responsibility and apologizing profusely. The room was dead quiet. The VP slowly says thank you for speaking up, they'll stop the investigation, and the call ends. Everyone files out. I asked the manager if she wants me to stay, but she says she can't talk to me right now. She doesn't talk to me for 3 weeks. And when she does talk to him finally, it turns out that her reaction, it was a bit more than just because, you know, how embarrassing it was to have the office shut down for the weekend. Then rally her whole staff into the office for a meeting with the district VP, get corporate involved, get the Mounties involved. All for her to be standing in front of everybody when they find out, oh, this was just a silly prank machine from ThinkGeek.com. You see, what made this so much worse, the manager, not knowing what to do with this mystery device. She's driving home from the office and she has it in the passenger seat of her car. And when she's driving home from the office, that's when she gets a call from the feds, saying, hey, you know that little thing you got there, sitting in your passenger seat? There's a possibility that that's a bomb. At that point, she bursts into tears and nearly drives her car into a ditch. So yeah, I guess a bit of a cold shoulder is understandable. The district VP threw a fit, and despite my 17-year unblemished work record, she tried really hard to have me fired. By some miracle, one of the company higher-ups appreciated the joke and he winds up keeping his job. Luckily, they didn't charge me the $50,000 plus in lost business, staff wages, and other miscellaneous costs. No, I don't know why my manager didn't just ask her staff if anybody knew about it instead of sending a fucking urgent memo to the entire fucking universe. My office is full of a lot of things, but common sense isn't one of them. He concludes by saying that his days of office pranks are over. And amid all the comments wondering about, was this just a lie made up to have some viral marketing for ThinkGeek? A user named MindTaker had a great suggestion. The only thing that would have made this better would be if they had found it and did all of this just to fuck with you. That would have been the perfect way to just flip this all back on them. All it needs is some J. Walter Weatherman type guy to lose his hand in the end.
That's why you don't yell.
It also prompted a lot of people to share their own experiences with the annoy-a-tron. For example, you had one guy who had a friend place it in his room underneath his chair, which leads to him removing every single object from his room one by one, including his TV and his computer, which he had to disassemble before moving it into the hallway. Ultimately though, he never actually found the annoy-a-tron. He just kinda gives up on the search, and when he's trying to sleep, he just plays loud music. This goes on until the battery dies, and 3 years later, his friend admits that, yeah, so here's what I did. You have another guy who worked in an auto parts shop. He hides one near his boss's desk, and the boss too never finds it. He would just stand around with his coworkers and watch as he tried to find the beep. And then you got the former MySpace employee who had a coworker start tearing apart computers within an hour of an annoy-a-tron being planted. That being said, I'm sure some of you guys have stories with the annoy-a-tron. Let me know about them. I don't think the original ones are actually made anymore, but I did see some copies of them on Amazon. If my channel's analytics are to be believed, the majority of you watching are probably somewhere in your mid-20s or mid-30s. So you've probably experienced some loss in your life, but never really had to face down your own mortality. Perhaps you've thought in passing about what you would do if you knew you were going to die. But most of you were likely never in a situation where you knew time was running out and you felt like you had to commit to something. Not the case for a Redditor named Glittering Craft 207. Faced with a diagnosis of inoperable cancer and given 6 months to live, she sat down and thought about what she wanted to do with her last months. And a decision was made. Save as much music from obscurity as possible. But in particular, one song. A song that had been haunting her for years. So for this episode of Tales from the Internet, let's take a look at a piece of lost media, a Redditor's dying wish. On Monday, April 4th of 2022, a Redditor named Glittering Craft 207 made a post on r/music with a mission. I'm dying. As my last mission, I will be hunting down and saving as much music from obscurity as possible. There's one song I want more than the rest. She begins with some details. So yeah, as the title said, I'm dying. 13 days ago, I received the news that I had an inoperable tumor in my spine and was given a timeline of 6 months to a year to live. As you can imagine, that pretty much changed my entire worldview overnight. In the days since then, I've thought a lot about what I can leave behind to make the world a little better or more interesting. Didn't accomplish much while I was here, including accumulating any significant amount of money to leave behind. But there are many things more precious than money, and I've always thought music was one of those things. As part of my mission, I will be doing things like reaching out to radio stations and YouTube channels that deal in all things obscure. For example, DC 101 used to play this really awesome program back in the day called Local Links. The odds that I've saved any of this music are pretty low, and I'll be lucky if I even manage to reach anyone, but I'm going to try my damnedest. But of all these songs, there's one that's haunted Glittering Craft for the past 4 years. A song that in previous posts attempting to find the song she described as the best song she had ever heard. But these previous posts on r/White Whale and r/Find That Song didn't get that much of a response. But here's what was known about the song. Glittering Craft heard the song on the radio station KXT Denton, which broadcasts to North Texas. It was played sometime between February 9th and February 14th of 2018, and was played between 9 and 11 in the morning. The song had a male singer, and Glittering Craft wrote down these lyrics, which came towards the end of the song. Google searches for these lyrics and variations of them, of course, didn't turn up the right song. She describes the band as being a melodic punk, and it had a male singer that sounded younger. It wasn't acoustic, and it sounded to be a full band with guitar, bass, and drums. She also mentions that it was very emotive and had a great guitar solo. Note that KXT Denton's website now has a feature where you can look up any song they played in the past 30 days. Although this feature didn't exist back then, it does imply they have some kind of records of what they play. However, her attempts to contact them throughout the years didn't get any results. She concludes, "So that's it, that's all I got. I know it's not much, but someone out there must know what this song is, so I'm hoping against hope to find it, if not for myself, then for future generations of listeners, so they can be moved by this beautiful song. It may seem a bit silly to get this hung up about a song, but looming death makes people do funny things. In the meantime, if anyone wants to DM me about the other things I've said, or if anyone has any obscure music to contribute, please reach out. Thanks for reading. The top response to the post came from someone who worked at a major cancer center. They suggested that Glittering Craft gets a second opinion, as throughout their time working at the place, they had seen many people get these kinds of death sentences only to find out that there was a procedure that could be done. Many instances in which neurosurgeons who specialized in cancer were able to remove previously inoperable tumors, something that a number of other posters co-signed and something that Glittering Craft expressed interest in. As for the investigation into the song, several people suggested that Glittering Craft record her version of the lyrics, so people can get some idea of what it might have sounded like. And here's the recording.
To try for anything, I couldn't stomach things. It just kept getting worse.
Some of the investigation involved looking up some of the DJs who might have played the song on KXD Denton. Names that came up included Brad Dolbeer, Paul Slavens, and Amy Miller. And in fact, when thinking of DJs who might have played it, Glittering Craft said the first name she thought of was Amy Miller. And believe it or not, someone in the thread named Solid Bob actually was Facebook friends with Amy Miller. He shot her a message, but unfortunately she couldn't identify the song and doesn't keep records that far back. In terms of how the song sounded, melodic punk can mean a lot of different things. On the r/white whale thread, a user named Urgy Burgy tried to narrow things down by throwing out some suggestions like have heart, verse, or lifelong tragedy, which prompted Glittering Craft to respond with a little more detail. I wish I had something to compare it to, but it was just so unique, and that's probably why it stayed with me for so many years. It definitely wasn't that post-hardcore, aggressive kind of sound from those bands you showed me, and it was nothing like the punk of the Ramones or Black Flag. It was easy to listen to and melodic, but the riffs seemed punky, kind of like how Nirvana used to make melodic punk riffs, but it's also nothing like Nirvana. And the vocals weren't screamy. I wish I remembered more. And to further narrow things down, someone else suggested the band Minus, to which she responded that it wasn't that punk. Some other suggestions included In My Stomach by Alkaline Trio, Can't Win by Pup, and Stomach by Ali and AJ. However, Glittering Craft has gone through all of the suggestions so far, and it wasn't any of them. Perhaps the closest thing to a match. And this is a suggestion that so many people are adamant about that a lot of them are even thinking that this has to be the song and maybe she's not remembering correctly, is Jordan That Was Savage by the band Whimper, which was a local band based out of Denton. Glittering Craft remarked that although this song isn't the song, it was remarkably similar to what she remembered. So on that note, I think it is merited to listen to a clip of that song, just so we have a ballpark idea of what we're actually looking for. Because of the similarity, someone suggested that maybe there was a live version of the song or an alternate version that was the actual one she had heard. And in fact, a user named Pinsindleton found a live version of the song which does have the lyrics slightly altered. A lot of people who are insistent that this has to be the song are bringing up the point that, in 4 years, your memory can make things a little bit fuzzy, maybe she's just not remembering it correctly. And while the human memory isn't perfect, I feel like in a situation like this, you might misremember some details about it, but I think that if you heard it, you would just know. In any case, there is another person in the thread who claims that the recording of the lyrics jogged their memory and they remember the song, and this isn't it. But as of now, I think this is all the information pertaining to this particular song. As for the greater mission of saving obscure music, Glittering Craft has begun a YouTube channel called Obscure Archives for the cataloging of this music. I will be looking for super rare stuff. Local stuff from radio shows all over the country, random things on Discogs that haven't been uploaded anywhere, that sort of thing. I would love some help with this, so if you have any submissions, if you know of any great radio shows that play stuff like this, email me at obscurearchives@outlook.com. So if you have anything that would fit this project, be sure to email her about it. And of course, if you have any leads on this mystery song, let us know. In 2008, a 4chan user took one of the most fateful dumps in all of human history. A poop so hard that water splashed back onto his butt cheeks. And that splashback upset him so much that he felt compelled to draw a comic and post it, establishing a format that would not just become a popular medium to tell jokes, but also to relay stories from people's everyday lives. Of course, I'm talking about Rage Comics. Imagine now, if this sudden burst of creativity from a person halfway across the world who just happened to pinch off too fat of a loaf one day had set off a sequence of events that would eventually lead to your life being saved. An unlikely story for sure, but for a friend of one Redditor, a true story. A story with ramifications that will forever affect the rest of his life. For today's episode of Tales from the Internet, we're talking about the man whose cancer was diagnosed by a Rage comic. Rage comics are a format that I think the general consensus for a long time was that they had overstayed their welcome by several years. I remember a period in time when I would just see the words "Les me" and it would make a vein in my forehead pulsate. Yeah, just like that. For some reason, and it feels silly now, but for some reason back then it just infuriated me how this format that started off as a simple way to tell simple jokes turned into this long, drawn-out, pretty boring storytelling format where people are basically just telling you what happened in their day, like it was some kind of, a visual diary entry. Like at that point, just tell me what happened, no need to have a bunch of faces next to it. I don't care that a tracing of Yao Ming thought your day was funny. More than a decade removed from it though, it's not so bad. It almost feels like a museum piece. A similar emotion to staring at a badly tiled GeoCities background. Just a mere artifact of our shared online past. But in any case, for the friend of one Reddit user, I have a feeling that Rage Comics would never feel cringe to them ever again. At least not after this happened. It begins with a post by Cap'n Poop Deck on November 3rd, 2012 in Reddit's Rage subreddit, or F7U12, retelling a story that happened to her friend in Rage comic form. Just mail me going through the medicine cabinet when suddenly I find an unused pregnancy test my ex-GF must have left. For shits and giggles, I use it. A little later, I'm pregnant. Look at Arnold Schwarzenegger over here. I mean, pregnancy tests, they're made to pee on, so why let it go to waste? Probably just something wrong with it, right? Who knows how long it's been sitting there? Well, the commenters had some other ideas. The top voted response by Godzilla. If this is true, you should check yourself for testicular cancer. Seriously, Google it. This theory was co-signed by several other commenters, including one claiming to be a medical student. Why would testicular cancer show up on a pregnancy test? And it's not like your balls are pregnant with the cancer. Well, here's how these home pregnancy tests work. They detect a hormone called human chorionic gonadotropin, or HCG. If you have a baby growing inside of you, this hormone shows up in your urine. However, there are a small amount of other things that could cause this hormone to show up in your urine, including certain types of testicular cancer. However, that's not the only reason it might show up. And some of those possibilities were also brought up in this thread. For example, steroid usage. Was Cap'n Poop Deck's friend on that there cell tech? You see, since steroids can shrink your balls, sometimes ACG can be supplemented to help keep them nice and plump. And there's also the possibility that it's worse than testicular cancer. Apparently, this can also be caused by certain types of brain tumors. And I guess that's just how it goes when diagnosing medical stuff online. All roads lead to brain tumors. Alternatively, maybe he just used it wrong. One poster mentioned that a pregnancy test will read positive if you let it sit too long, although another poster responded that this line is different from the one that shows up when you test positive for pregnancy. And this is an occurrence that's been the source of a lot of stress for a lot of women. In any case, Captain Poop Deck would return later after reading these responses. Whoa, just saw all the cancer comments. It was my friend that did the test. I just made the comic for him, but I am letting him know to test himself for cancer immediately. Thank you for letting me know, guys. We may have dodged a bullet here. Keep us posted. I just got off the phone with him. He's going to check himself, then go and see a doctor on Monday to be absolutely sure. Kinda weird people may have or have not discovered cancer through a Rage comic. Monday came and people are bracing for an update, and Poop Deck shows up as promised. Update for everyone, my friend's appointment to get checked will be at 3, and I will be home at a computer at about 5:30. I have my friend's permission to post the result as long as I do not use his name. This is when I will post the results. The results will either be put in a self-post, or I will put a URL to another F7U12 in the comments. Please tell me what you want, and I will do so accordingly. Update. Attention everyone, results are here. Thank you for everything, Reddit. So the results were in, given in the form of another Rage comic. Hello, Reddit. Many of you read the comic about my friend using a preg test as a joke and it testing positive, which is a sign of cancer, as all of you told us. Today, he went to the doctor to be tested, and in his right testicle they found a very small tumor, but since it was caught early, it could be treated immediately. To be honest with everyone, I assumed it was nothing, considering a pregnancy test finding cancer seemed a bit odd. But I guess there is a hormone the test picks up that the tumor produces, and that is why the test said he was pregnant. I'm not sure what face to use. I'm sad he might lose a nut, while I'm also amazed a preg test picked up a fucking tumor and happy it was caught early all at the same time. So both of us want to say thank you. And in all seriousness, if you are male, check yourself for testicular cancer regularly. If you're a girl, test yourself for breast cancer regularly. For directions on how to check yourself, please go look online or go to cancerresearchuk.org. Thank you again, Reddit. Namaste. All seriousness aside, this comic honestly is such a perfect look at the problem people were having with Rage comics at this time. Like, you didn't need the faces there. You could have just said this. You could have just wrote it. Granted, in this context, it makes sense because it started as a Rage comic thing on the Rage comic forum, but there are so many like this that didn't have that context. But I digress because that's kind of besides the point. We've got not necessarily a happy ending. I mean, ideally there's no cancer, but testicular cancer is super treatable when caught, and thankfully it got caught because of this thread. A bunch of news outlets pick up the story, and Reddit celebrates a little, and you would think this would be the end of the story, but something raised my eyebrow when I was looking at this thread for this video. I found it kind of strange that Captain Poopdeck's account was deleted, but I mean 9 years had passed. People delete accounts for all kinds of reasons. You know, maybe she just got tired or nuked it for a job or who knows what. But then I realized looking through the archive that the account had gotten deleted really quickly after this post. So something was telling me that shit got weird, so I looked back through the thread and oh yeah, shit got weird. At first she's mostly just expressing that she's concerned for her friend who is understandably scared about this diagnosis. No matter how treatable it is, it's scary. He's worried that he's gonna lose a ball and girls won't like him anymore and he'll never get laid again. Which, I mean, if anything, you know, having one ball, that's just an excuse to get people to look at your fucking balls. But I mean, she starts to think that she doesn't want to get so much attention to this post, and she tells people, hey, you know, stop spreading this post around, you know, don't upvote it anymore or anything, but it's too late. It's already on the front page. And more news outlets are covering this, which also became a problem. Edit, I've been being nice about this, but can all the reporters back the fuck off? I'm trying my best to be there for my friend to keep him out of the blues, but it's difficult with dozens of goddamn reporters demanding we talk about it. We've spoken to enough, there are enough stories about it, it is so stressful to talk to reporters about this every day. He's already stressed about the cancer itself as it is, and the reporters asking him questions about it just adds tremendously to it. And we just want to be left in peace so we can get him through this smoothly and as stresslessly as possible. So please, reporters, back off. And then you've got the next obvious step of any big story on Reddit that happens, everyone suddenly thinks it's fake. So they start demanding her prove that her friend has cancer, to which she responds, how the fuck do I prove he has cancer? I can't send his name out in the comments, and it's not like a picture of his sack will show anything. I mean, with a lot of these cases, you really can't prove it without doxing a person who doesn't want to be doxed. She could post something hiding the info, but then people would just say that that was fake. And after she already got the news from how she approached him about giving her something else to show to Reddit. Hey dude, I know you're worried about your cancer diagnosis, but could you take a moment to send me your paperwork? Yeah, I know, some people on Reddit don't believe you have cancer, so, you know, the people aren't satisfied. They gotta know that the heartwarming, feel-good story about online happenstance is a real story. And they didn't feel good for fake reasons. If you make me feel fake good, there'll be hell to pay. Already got 6 private messages with people telling me I'm a liar about my friend, when I'm not lying. It takes a fucked up attention whore to lie about this. And I don't want people to think I'm one of those kinds of people. Honestly. I kind of want to delete this whole thread altogether. I'm not enjoying getting yelled at. I've had a shitty enough day with him getting checked and all. Frowny face. She asked the Reddit mods if they could remove the karma from her account so people know that this isn't all about fake internet points to her, but they can't because that's not how the website works. And there were plenty of support and people telling her that she's kind of getting a little too invested in meaningless Reddit culture stuff. And ultimately she should keep the thread up because ultimately it's good for the thread to be around so people can think, oh, testicular cancer, that's a real thing, maybe I should get checked out. So she got a few back and forth posts with people telling her not to take the Reddit stuff too seriously and she did a good thing, but ultimately, shortly after all this, it appears that that's when she deletes her whole account. Only on Reddit can a silly meme in a dead format go on to become a life-saving cancer diagnosis, then go on to being an outrage controversy that causes someone to delete their whole fucking account. But in any case, I think it's safe to say that this is the only time in all of recorded human history that a rage comic will be the solution to, rather than the cause of cancer. Quentin Tarantino is a beautiful man. Perhaps not by conventional beauty standards, with his features that some might describe as duck-like, or his vague resemblance to a character from Code Lyoko. But the fact is that he's an interesting fellow to look at. And of all the images that exist of America's favorite foot enthusiast, my favorite of all time are this series of images of him aimlessly milling about an apartment, just looking at all the things. Yep, that's a kitchen alright. That sure is a mirror. Those cups are just for decoration, don't touch them. I was clearly not alone in being completely fascinated by these images in ways that I find difficult to articulate, because every time they would pop up it seems like they went viral all over again. And to this day they still circulate from time to time. But what I didn't know is that within these images there's contained an even more absurd story. So for this episode of Tales from the Internet, let's take a look at Quentin Tarantino wandering around an apartment. I know it's such a cliche film bro thing for me to say, but Quentin Tarantino is one of my favorite directors. Like if somebody was quizzing me about it, I'd probably say Kitano or Cronenberg, but Tarantino's definitely up there. And if I'm being completely honest, probably the main reason why I did go to school for film. He just has a way of taking ideas from these fringe subgenres of film that already resonated me and elevating them to a higher level. And although I feel like he's fallen out of favor with a lot of people in the past years, I'm still a fan, even of his newer stuff. But this video isn't about Tarantino's movies. It's about that notorious series of photographs of him aimlessly wandering around an apartment. Ever since I saw them, I think it was about a year ago, I don't think a week has gone by where I haven't thought about them at least once. At some point I even took the time to Photoshop the jar into the teacup image. There's just so many questions and so few answers, it's hypnotic. The way he's taking in these mundane surroundings like he's in some kind of a museum. There's nothing particularly unusual about the apartment aside from, you know, the ornate tea set behind glass that he's staring at with a somber look as if hundreds of men died in a war for that teapot. But some people have tea sets that they care deeply about, so I guess it's not that strange. And it's not like he's never been in a house before. I mean, Quentin Tarantino is not a wild animal. He just looks like he's bored, waiting around for maybe his ride to come pick him up, just pacing around until he gets the call. And maybe he was, but then you have to ask, why was someone there taking pictures of that? Was it a photo shoot for some kind of a magazine interview? I mean, I guess I could see it having the kind of vibe, like maybe it's supposed to be some kind of tell-all that shows us the real side of Quentin Tarantino. We're gonna explore his childhood trauma or some shit like that. But it still kind of feels awkward even for that sort of thing. These photos would occasionally make their way around Twitter with hundreds of people being as entranced with them as I was, and as quarantine set in, people would joke around about how this is what their life is like now. Just walking around their apartment not knowing what to do with themselves all day. But every time these images pop up, it just goes back to that question. Why do these images exist? Well, in the replies to some of these viral posts, people would point to Russia. Honestly, what is the real purpose of these pictures? Well, the truth is really that simple. It's Quentin Tarantino having a look around some rather old school and actually not super common Russian apartment during his visit to Moscow. Why would anyone need this photo set is beyond understanding. His reaction is as expected. There were a lot of versions of this explanation floating around, and while it doesn't specifically tell us why they exist, it gives us some context. So let's take a look at Quentin Tarantino's Russian trip. It was August of 2019. Tarantino's most recent film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, had premiered that past May at the Cannes Film Festival to much critical acclaim, although being beaten out by Parasite for the Palme d'Or award. It did, however, have an award winner in Sayuri the Pitbull, who was awarded the Palm Dog Award for her performance as Brandy. With its US theatrical release behind him in July, Quentin Tarantino began to embark on a world tour to promote the movie, and its Russian stop was scheduled for August 7th. On that date, Quentin Tarantino would be doing a special live presentation of the film for the press. Nice of Dwayne Johnson to lend Quentin Tarantino The Rock's $500 shirt. The official theatrical release of this film in Russia would be on August 8th, the day after, and it became a box office hit in Russia, earning over 500 million rubles in its opening weekend, and becoming Tarantino's highest grossing film in the country to date. But what was perhaps more newsworthy was Quentin Tarantino's adventures in Moscow the day prior. Tarantino had not been to Russia since 2004, so Russia's culture minister Vladimir Mendonça invited him on a tour. From the reporting, it seems that Tarantino might have been a bit reluctant to go on this tour. It didn't really go into specifics, but he mentioned to the press a few times that he wasn't really there to see the Russian government and he had his disagreements with the government, and he was mainly in the country to see the Russian people, the fans of his films. In any case though, he did agree to Mendonça's tour and was taken around the Kremlin and the Red Square. When asked about the tour, Mendonça had this to say. He was very emotional and interested in Russian history. He was completely shocked by Moscow, Mendonça told state-run RA Novosti news outlet on Thursday. He was shown around all the old chambers. We went from halls from the 15th century to those of the 19th century like a time machine. By all accounts, Tarantino had a good time on this tour and commented about how shocked he was at the country's improvement since 2004. The trip also gave us so many amazing photos of Quentin Tarantino looking at stuff. Some of it seemingly genuinely taking in the beauty of centuries-old artwork, and others kind of doing that thing where you want to look interested in something you're looking at because someone else is looking at you looking at it. It's like when you're on The Price is Right and you think you're gonna get a new car, but then it's not a new car, it's a dining set. Here's some plates. I'm so excited for this dinette set. But wait, what's this? That pose looks kinda familiar. Oh wait, this is the exact pose from the apartment. Clearly, someone had taken Quentin Tarantino's photos from the Kremlin and photoshopped them inside the apartment. But why? Although I'm sure any Russian viewers might be familiar with the sequence of events here, the English-speaking world got kind of a garbled mess of conflicting accounts about it. A combination of the language barrier and stuff just kind of gradually filtering through some kind of online osmosis. So according to some people, this was simply the work of shit posters from Russian social media on sites like VK. Just making a meme out of photoshopping him into different places. This was actually the version of the story that I was led to believe at first. Although that being said, these photoshopped images did wind up becoming a meme in and of themselves. Like this one that made the rounds on VK. It says, "Trying to find dad's booze stash." Basically the same way that English speakers would eventually use the format. Other accounts led to the story of a man named Alexander Kainov. On August 11th, Alexander made a post announcing that he was selling his 3-room apartment in the city Chelyabinsk. The photos of the apartment for sale include photos of Quentin Tarantino checking the place out, maybe looking for a vacation home in his new favorite country. A lot of people have attributed the origin of the apartment photos to Alexander's post. However, only 2 of the viral ones appear here. The one with the painting behind him, and the one where he's looking at the tea set. There's several other photos included of Quentin checking out a very different apartment with not as high of a caliber of Photoshop. In fact, a lot of the comments from people on the post were criticizing Alexander's Photoshop skills, as well as Quentin's dinosaur hands. In any case, Alexander's post did go viral, causing a lot of media outlets to get in touch with him, including RIA's realty branch, who wanted to see if his post going viral helped him sell the apartment. We haven't managed to sell an apartment yet, but in 5 hours, there were about 6,000 views of the ad. Viral marketing turned out to be very interesting. Selling an apartment is not the first goal. There's no hard need for a sale. In the first place is the desire for creative implementation. There are no active buyers yet, but maybe it will reach Tarantino himself. People like it, I am satisfied with the result, the idea itself is very interesting. In reality, Alex's posting was most likely inspired by what's, as far as I can tell, the real origin of these images. A tweet a few days prior by Yandex Realty, the branch of the Yandex Corporation that promises to help you find your dream home. When I came to view the apartment, original photos Valerie Sharafulin TASS. Basically, an employee of Yandex sat down and made these photoshops just for a Twitter post, and they wound up going all over the place, completely removed of their original context. And hats off to them, because these are absurdly high quality photoshops. The way they perfectly matched up not just the lighting, but color corrected his skin and clothes, so that he fits in the apartment seamlessly. I mean, now that I know they're not real, I can pick out little things that are inaccurate, but I would never have really known otherwise. So for all the American corporations on Twitter, you know, trying to be epic Chungus memerinos, I guess the Russians got you beat. In September of 2018, Marvel's Spider-Man released for PlayStation 4. It was extremely well received by both critics and fans, breaking sales records in its first week and placing on several publications' end-of-year best-of lists. It also received a lot of praise for doing a great job of capturing New York City. But although Spider-Man's New York City is relatively accurate for a game, it's not a one-to-one copy. For example, at the corner of Canal Street and Church Street, where in real life there is a post office, in Spider-Man there's a movie theater. And at that movie theater lies the game's most infamous Easter egg. A real-life marriage proposal gone horribly wrong. But there's a lot more to this story than most people would ever find out. So for today's video, let's take a look at what's become known as the saddest Easter egg. It's always been a rare privilege to get your name in a video game. I mean, yeah, you could work to get the high score and put your initials in. But there's few with the honor of being in the actual game. You got the contest winners who got their names on dog tags in Metal Gear Solid 2. Or how about the infamous Chris Houlihan room in A Link to the Past? Supposedly named after a Nintendo-powered contest winner who has never been found and may not actually exist. But for a woman named Maddie, getting her name in a video game was far from an honor. When people came across this movie theater marquee in Spider-Man for PS4, they probably thought it was a developer putting in a message for his girlfriend, or maybe even something to do with an upcoming quest in the game. Perhaps even a small piece of world building, because the best open world games create a sense that the world we're in doesn't revolve around us. It's a world filled with real people with lives going on that are totally irrelevant to the plot. But no, in this case there was a real Maddie. It just wasn't a game developer's Maddie. On May 10th of 2018, a Twitter user named Tyler, TopNotch1210, wrote a tweet at Insomniac Games tagging Spider-Man YouTuber Evan Filarka. I need your help. This may be selfish, but I'm ready to propose to my girlfriend and want to do it in a big way. Insomniac Games, Brian Inthar, Bill Roseman, is there any way you can put an Easter egg of Madison, will you marry me, anywhere in the game? Now, people tweet these sorts of requests at content creators, game developers, all kinds of public figures all the time. Usually they go unnoticed or ignored. But this time, there actually was a response from Insomniac Games. You sure she doesn't check your Twitter replies, dude? 100%, ooh smiley face. Sure you can wait until September 7th? We've just passed our 5 years in April, so I think she'll still be around in September, lol. God damn, that's some dramatic foreshadowing. Well, okay then, who are we to say no to love? DMing you and we will see if we can work something out. Also know that there's no special reason that the Twitter interface is Korean, that's just the version that's archived. So September 7th comes along and people are finding all kinds of Easter eggs in this game. References to Doctor Strange, GTA 4, Tomb Raider, and all kinds of others are being shared around. But there's no comment on the proposal until the 9th. That's when Tyler uploads a video to his YouTube channel entitled Spider-Man PS4 Easter Egg Meaning. In the video, he navigates to the movie theater and tells the story of how he spoke with Insomniac to set up the proposal. However, he says that 3 or 4 weeks prior, Maddie had broken up with him, left him for his brother, and said that she said this was not how she wanted to be proposed to. But regardless of how the proposal went, he said he's happy it made it into the game and the game itself has been helping him cope with this trying time. Now, in general, I think big public proposals in front of a lot of people are just not a good idea. It puts such an amount of pressure on the person being proposed to that they kind of feel forced to say yes. And if they still don't say yes, you look like such a massive bozo. And this right here goes well beyond the proposal at a restaurant. The game literally sold millions of copies in a couple days. It broke sales records for Sony. But according to a message Tyler sent to Kotaku, Maddie actually said that she wanted to be proposed to at a large convention. So in his mind, he was taking her idea and ramping it up a notch. Insomniac's art director, Jacinda Chu, offered to change the marquee for Tyler. At first he didn't want to change it, but eventually he said it would be nice to do a tribute to his grandmother, who was the first person to get him interested in Spider-Man. And now, of course, with this situation going massively viral, Maddie has become the biggest villain on the internet at this time. You know, how dare she leave this sweet boy who got her in the Spider-Man game. And to leave him for, of all people, his brother? This is some Trailer Park Jerry Springer shit. Well, in a message to Kotaku, Maddie would claim that she actually did not leave him for his brother. And she would go into further detail when speaking to Cameron, I keep calling him cameraman. Cameron Kunzelman of the Houston Press. Cameron felt that something didn't smell right about this whole story, so he found Maddie on Facebook and sent her a message. She said that they had gotten together when they were both very young, and when she was about 15 and a half, due to unforeseen circumstances, he had to move in with her and her family. She compared the situation to the Brady Bunch with 8 people crammed into a house, and this was hard on their relationship. Our relationship was great for a long time, but I started to realize about a year ago that I was not happy. I kept it going because I wanted to make it work, but he has done some things that I realized I really shouldn't have forgave him for. Our relationship had issues both mentally and physically. He never understood me, unfortunately. Even the proposal, which he thought was the save-all of our relationship, was never the way I would have liked to be proposed to. I never liked video games, but I sat through them because I loved him. Our relationship turned into a mother and son relationship where I had to remind him about things. I had to deal with his financial mistakes, his violent outbursts, etc. We never did things normal couples would, like go out, dance, parties, sit under the stars. She said that she was a highly motivated person with a lot of opportunities in life. And it was a struggle for her to have to motivate him to get out of bed or do something besides play video games. So she gave him an ultimatum. He had a month to change her mind. And he did not succeed at changing her mind. She also denied that she was ever in a relationship with his brother. Rather, after the breakup, he had asked his brother to check up on her and see if she's doing okay. And from that point, they just became close friends. The things he has been saying about me hurt, and that is something we mutually agreed not to do to each other. But it is not being reciprocated now. I think it's just easier for him to hate me than to be hurt by my decision to break up. I hope he moves on and finds happiness because that's exactly what I am doing. Ultimately, she would wind up deleting all of her social media accounts due to harassment she was receiving from his supporters. And after Maddie's side came out, Tyler would make a follow-up video. In the video, he admits that some of what she said was true, in particular spending a lot of his time playing video games and being bad with money. He also urges his supporters not to harass her and that he didn't intend for his video to be seen as him speaking ill of her or his brother, and he wishes the best for both of them. He also says that the best thing for him now would be to focus on himself, and he states his intention to make some video content as well as finish a book he had been working on. There didn't seem to be much of the video content made, but he did actually finish his book. Entitled Damaged Goods, it's a collection of 39 poems that was released in January of 2020. He's also co-written a short film entitled Before I Go, which is slated for a 2024 release. At the end of the day, I don't think either of these people are the villain in the story. It's just a messy breakup between two very young people that got thrust out way further in the public than it ever should have. I think Reddit commenter Water Squirrel put it best. Local couple makes poor decisions at the age of 20. Yep, that's what you do. Although this proposal didn't work out for Tyler and Maddie, it did work out for someone else. A 20-year-old Reddit user named Mitch also happened to be dating a girl named Maddie. He had bought the ring already and was planning to propose to her, and when this happened, he had to take the opportunity. But if you're planning on proposing to someone through a video game, perhaps one that's going to be played by millions of people isn't the best route. I think Reddit user Poopstrap had the right idea. Poopstrap, aka Dennis Wells, taught himself game development and pixel art. Then he spent 9 months creating a basic 2D platformer starring his girlfriend, culminating in an in-game meeting with him in which he proposes. And unlike Maddie, she says yes. Anyway, that's the story of the saddest Easter egg. Few musicians in Midwest emo are as beloved as American football. Their self-titled debut firmly established them as essential to the genre, and they remained popular enough that despite breaking up in the 90s, they reformed 15 years later. They become so well known that many can recognize them from a single riff, or a rundown, chipped white house. Today, we're going to be talking about that home, its overnight fame, questionable reviews, and seemingly unavoidable fate of demolition. This is the story of the American football house. American football formed in the late 90s at the University of Illinois. Their first album released in 1999 to critical acclaim, in large part for the opening song, Never Meant. Its dreamlike sound and confessional lyrics made it an instant hit on college radio. In spite of this though, their run was remarkably short-lived. As college ended, life took the friends separate ways, causing them to split up months later. The unfulfilled promise of this band was taunting, as years later they would go on to achieve cult status. And that status only grew as American football made best of lists year after year. And with such little material, the fans latched onto whatever they could, including the album's only visual. The cover is an upward shot of a house in Urbana, Illinois. It's located at 704 West High Street, within walking distance of campus. This proximity made it a popular choice to rent among undergrads. Strangely enough though, no one in the band actually lived there. The photo was taken by Chris Strong, a friend of theirs who lived in the basement, but they ended up inside the house a lot anyway for frequent parties and DIY shows. Those memories led the house to be chosen as a symbol of their college lives. There's something about it that captures the essence of American football perfectly. Feels familiar in a small-town America kind of way. Strong has attempted to put this into words himself. For me, a lot of the stuff in the album artwork has to do with Urbana in general instead of specifically that house. It's super dark and kind of run down, but in a great way. There's dirty corners, there's a nice Urbana thing about Urbana that I can't put my finger on. The atmosphere and the band's elusiveness would make this site iconic. The house became synonymous with the band as somewhat of an unconventional mascot. And that was while, mind you, it was still being used as a college residence. To everyone else, it was no different from any other student housing. Most undergrads only stayed there for a year or two, which meant that it went up for sale pretty often. Occasionally someone would rent it knowingly, which typically would lead to shows and emo dance parties. Now, it's worth pointing out that this house wasn't exactly a great place to live. The layout was bizarre. The hallway to the kitchen was so small that opening up a pantry made it inaccessible from the living room. It was also just poorly constructed. As Strong recalled, the basement flooded like crazy. And while there were small renovations, these conditions in general never really improved, which Strong discovered firsthand in 2014. That year, the band reunited in limited capacity. They would perform live to promote a special deluxe edition. But this reissue was so successful that it ultimately inspired a full-fledged return. Following their revival, Strong was hired to direct a music video for Never Meant. This took him back to his old stomping grounds. He was given a tour by then-resident Jessica Knowles, who called it really shitty. Good shitty, maybe, but still bad. The ceiling was falling apart and the basement still flooded. But as a lifetime fan, she found it endearing. Jessica had signed the lease without knowing it was the real deal. Upon realizing this, she broke in a few days early to explore. That was the power of being associated with such a popular act. People were just willing to put up with these conditions. In fact, many went out of their way traveling across the country to visit this emo landmark. In 2016, Vice published an article documenting this phenomenon. The author Sean Newman notes that the sidewalk was covered in marks. There were attempts to find the exact spot the photo was taken. It was such a regular occurrence that one way or another, everyone who lived there knew about the band. While most responded kindly, the attention wasn't always appreciated. James Onderdonk was one such resident who lived there from 2012 to 2013. He became so frustrated that he began lying to the tourists. He would tell them that the real house was actually up the block. He recalled, "One time I was sitting on the porch and some guy came by and asked if he could have his friend take a picture in front of the house. Presumably, there's a picture out there somewhere of a person pointing at the house and smiling, with me in the background drinking beer and scowling." Bear in mind, this was still early on. That's before the address was added to Atlas Obscura, and before it was designated as a place of worship on Google Maps. The Hard Times even made an article satirizing the trend, "Stop taking pictures of my fucking house." But tourism was only one part of the fiasco, as the problem went both ways. More and more students began attempting the rent there for the sake of living in the American football house. It's what could only be described as an arms race of college kids fighting for their chance to briefly be able to call it their own. There were heated arguments every year the place opened up. Even random Twitter users started to watch its listings. Real talk, when I was in college, the American Football House went up for rent, and I actually almost dropped out of college to move into it with a group of strangers from the internet. So the owners capitalized this and gradually priced it higher. You had to pay a premium for what the band themselves called a shitty house. In 2018, it listed at $1,600 a month. The price raised to $1,850 by 2020.
What the fuck?
That same year, a follow-up on the emo tourist was published in the Daily Illini, an independent student newspaper for the university. They interviewed Caitlin Kengel, who shared at the time with 2 roommates. It seems that even with this demand, the owners were still unwilling to do proper maintenance. Because somehow, her review is worse than any of the other accounts that existed before her. It was gross. There were mice in the basement. The basement floor would grow mildew all the time. The shower head in the upstairs bathroom faced the short way of the tub, and if the shower curtain was hanging over the edge just a little bit, water would flood the sloped bathroom floor and leak into the kitchen. If that wasn't enough, her bedroom was right above the front door, which meant that she resided in the very same window seen on the album cover. Not only that, but the photo on the album cover was taken at night. That meant that late night visitors would wait for the sunset and for her bedroom light to turn on. So they can get a more accurate tribute photo. And at this point, now you've got people traveling internationally to see this landmark. But like so many before her, she was able to overlook it as a fan. The home became a catalyst for new memories and even connections. Caitlin once found a CD on her porch from a band named Camp Edwards. It had been left there by the songwriter without any much expectations. But she wound up enjoying the album so much she invited them to come play a show. There was just something about this house that encouraged all these small but meaningful interactions. To this day, Sean Newman continues to get messages about the house because of his article. They're usually for people who lived there or visited during their childhood. He posted one such email to Twitter in late 2022. Sean, swear to God, decided to look up my great-grandmother Bessie Ray's old house. Remember the house from when I was around 5 to 12 years old in the 60s. I'm 64 now. Anyway, due to the magic of Zillow and Google Street View, I am positive the house was 704 High Street in Urbana. My father lived with his grandparents there while at the University of Illinois. After he was in the army in Korea, Bessie Ray baked up a storm in that kitchen. She always had renters upstairs. I remember that front hallway, the stairs to the left, and the French doors on the right leading to the living room. I am listening to American football right now on Napster. Okay, I'll be honest, I never heard of them before this. Who knew? Thanks for the memories via your Vice article. Michael and Adam Thies both worked at Polyvinyl, the label behind American football. Through ancestry tests, they discovered that their great-great-grandfather was one of the house's earliest residents. He died inside the house in 1931. Michael reflected, "It's totally bizarre. I feel connected to it because of my personal family history, but also just having grown up in Champaign-Urbana. Inevitably, you're going to end up in a basement of a house that looks like that. It always felt familiar to me. There's so many families in that community with ties to that specific abode. From the present-day undergrad to the 60-year-old recontextualizing his childhood. It's strangely ubiquitous. Even without the album, it had become a relic due to its construction back in 1893, and it stood the test of time. So you can only imagine how worrying it was when the owner started planning to sell the property. On March 22nd, 2023, a post was made to r/UIUC by PooGirl1003. Prepare to say goodbye to the American Football House. She explains that an agency was buying all of the properties on that block. They're going to tear them down in favor of building apartments. And the comments someone casts doubt. A friend of mine told me he knows the owners of the house and they are big AF fans and have no plans to sell it. To which PooGirl retorts, the people who owned the American Football House also owned our house and sold all of them last summer. So there was a genuine concern that this landmark was going to be demolished, putting over a century of history at risk. And given that most of the people interested in preserving it were broke college students, all hope seemed lost. That is, until a surprise announcement was made by the band less than 2 months later. On May 5th, 2023, Polyvinyl issued a press release announcing that American Football had bought the American Football House. Built in 1893, the home has become a historical monument to not only the band, but every fan who's listened to their era-defining debut that established its quaint facade as iconic Midwest imagery. When we heard in the fall of 2022 that the house was for sale, we made a pact with our friends to protect the house from developers and likely demolition. A few days ago, we held true to this promise and formally signed the closing papers, preserving both the space and its unique legacy within the community that shaped its existence. In the nearly 25 years since American football's release of LP1, This white clapboard house has become one of music's biggest monuments, receiving visitors from across the world on their emo pilgrimage. It has hosted decades of house parties and punk shows all around the property, from a half-pipe in the backyard to the back porch to the basement. In 2020, it was the official venue for Neverment, one of the first virtual concerts hosted in Minecraft during COVID, bringing fans together at a time when they simply couldn't be. When American football reunited in 2016, their long-awaited LP2 cover donned the house's interior staircase and invited fans inside by revisiting breakout track Neverment, with an official music video shot within its howled walls. The song's jangly opening riff is as recognizable as the house itself, having been memed into infamy. Besides being a literal home to its many tenants throughout the years, the American football house has come to represent a nostalgic dream of possibility and the beauty of the beginning. We could not let that dream go. Now, their statement doesn't clarify any plans, so it's not entirely clear what the future holds. Some have suggested that they should turn it into an emo museum or an Airbnb, but so far it seems like nothing has changed, remaining a home for students at the University of Illinois. Maybe that's for the best. Part of the magic is that it's just a place for people to crash. That feels in some ways a lot more valuable than an exhibit, or an expensive bidding war. At the same time, I hope they finally get around to doing some of the necessary maintenance, because you can't have these people breathing in mildew. An explanation that you often hear for why millennials and zoomers have significantly less money than generations before them isn't things like wage stagnation, a rapidly increasing cost of living, degree inflation, or anything like that. Rather, they're just simply buying too many frivolous things. You know, if only you'd skip the avocado toast, you could buy a house. A meme about this that you see sometimes is the clothes comparison of broke dudes versus rich dudes, with the rich dude being a lot more thrifty. And then you got Romanian Shrek, who's saving even more money. Probably the greatest real-life example of this that people point to is Mark Zuckerberg. That is, example of a rich guy, not Romanian Shrek. See, Zook doesn't need any fancy hypebeast clothes for smoking meats and shooting goats with laser guns. He's usually fine with just some plain gray t-shirts. You can go to Caldor and get a pack of 3 for like $10, right? Mark Zuckerberg's plain gray t-shirts cost hundreds of dollars. And there's actually a surprising amount of lore behind them. So for this video, let's take a look at Mark Zuckerberg's t-shirts. The focus on Mark Zuckerberg's wardrobe really began shortly after the release of 2010's movie The Social Network. It's a film about the creation of Facebook through the lens of several real-life lawsuits. Zuckerberg actually had nothing to do with this movie, so he went on a press tour to dispel things that he thought were inaccurate. That being said, he did feel it necessary to give credit where credit was due. Specifically, the wardrobe department for this movie killed it. Every single article of clothing that was shown in this movie was one he actually owned. That included the scene where he showed up to a meeting in pajamas and fuck you flip-flops. This attention to detail was very important as the filmmakers felt that he had inadvertently become a fashion icon. Jacqueline West, their costume designer, would state, "It looks like he doesn't care at all what he wears. But in a funny way, he's created a fashion. It's the new banker." He represented a trend in the faces of Silicon Valley, that disregard for style is the new status symbol. Unfortunately for Mark though, GQ wasn't convinced, placing Mark at the top of their 2011 list of the worst dressed men in Silicon Valley. Oblivious to the fact that jeans and ties come in skinny sizes, or that suits exist, the father of Facebook, and we do mean a father, loves to recycle the fresh from stats class look. Zook's style is so poor, it even inspired a mock fashion line, Mark by Mark Zuckerberg, which thankfully doesn't sell any actual clothing. Their complaints fell on deaf ears though, and Mark Zuckerberg did nothing other than double down. In fact, his style arguably got even worse. He began to wear the same exact gray tee at every public event. At first, people pointed this out as a joke, but Zuckerberg would confirm that this was all actually intentional. He revealed he had a single drawer for clothes with 20 identical shirts, living like a real-life Doug Funny. And people were shocked by this given that the CEO is worth over $9 billion at the time. Why was it that Mark Zuckerberg chose to get rid of any and all variety in his fashion? Some speculated it was an attempt to mimic Steve Jobs, who similarly kept a consistent outfit. His uniform of a black turtleneck, Levi's jeans, and New Balance sneakers became iconic, and it helped him establish a brand identity. But the public wouldn't get a definitive answer until the fall of 2014. That November, Zook held his first ever public Q&A session, and of course, someone had to ask him about his wardrobe. To which, Mark had a surprisingly elaborate response.
I really want to clear my life to make it so that I have to make as few decisions as possible about anything except how to best serve this community. I'm in this really lucky position where I get to wake up every day and help serve more than 1 billion people, right? And I feel like I'm not doing my job if I spend any of my energy on things that are silly or frivolous about my life, so that way I can dedicate all of my energy towards just building the best products and services and helping us reach our goal and achieve this mission of helping to connect everyone in the world and giving them the ability to stay connected with the people that they love and care about.
People were quick to point out that this in and of itself was a fashion choice. It'd have taken less effort to just wear the clothes he had before. But others appreciated his approach to simplicity as it was backed by science.
There's actually a bunch of psychology theory that even making small decisions around what you wear or what you eat for breakfast or things like that, they kind of make you tired.
It all comes down to something called decision fatigue. Decision fatigue is the idea that your ability to make choices becomes worse as the day goes on. Even if you're not consciously tired, making decision after decision has a biological price. It's a sentiment that was also pointed out by President Obama, who usually only wore the same colored suits. Except, that one time. He would state, you need to focus on your decision-making energy. You need to routinize yourself. You can't be going through the day distracted by trivia. So people accepted this as both a financial and a strategic decision. For April Fool's 2016, H&M launched their Mark Zuckerberg collection. It's nothing more than 7 pairs of their basic gray tees and a single pair of jeans. It's a testament to the often held belief that the most rich live frugally. But that perception changed when Mark Zuckerberg posted a picture of his actual closet. The photo itself was inoffensive, with a caption about not knowing what to wear, and it went viral as people not privy to this habit reacted for the first time. But GQ would make the observation that these weren't just any old gray t-shirts. With a closer view of his outfit, they could better discern its make and quality. Look closely and you'll see that Zook's hoodies and tees look a lot more cashmere than fleece, like those from J. Crew, Elder Statesman, and Bruno Cucinelli. That's right. Maybe this champion of everyman style is actually walking around in $900 tees and $2,000 hoodies. And they were right. In actuality, the CEO's attire had been custom ordered from Bruno Cucinelli. The designer's publicly sold lookalike cost a minimum of $295. That meant that Mark Zuckerberg spent over $4,000 on the clothes in that photo alone. Imagine spending that kind of money, and it's not even Rick. So yeah, Mark Zuckerberg isn't doing the kind of frugal penny pitching that your disappointed parents think he is. It's a wardrobe that's out of the reach of most normal people. But fret not, fans of his aesthetic. There was still hope to mimic his style. In 2017, a site called ZuckerbergShirt.com was launched to sell replicas of his tees. It was started by Vresh Clothing, a company based out of Europe. They studied his shirts to make them as close to the original as possible. Not only are they spot on, but they're priced way more affordably at just 40 euros, which is about 46 bucks. Likely to assure good faith, they would clarify in interviews that all profit went to the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. That is, Facebook's philanthropic company that occasionally invests in startups. Now, it may seem kind of goofy that I just spent so long talking about Mark Zuckerberg's t-shirts, and it kinda is. But really, understanding this is the key to understanding so much of what he does. This was his attempt at establishing a personal brand identity. And that means that anytime he would divert from this casual wardrobe, he was attempting to make an explicit statement. In 2009, Zuckerberg wore a tie every day to show he was serious about growing in the face of the recession. And a similar sentiment was echoed when he was forced to testify in front of Congress. In 2018, Zook was called into Washington following the Cambridge Analytica scandal. It was a political consulting firm that harvested data from over 87 million Facebook users. He was pressed for hours on Facebook's mishandling of information. An interrogation has become infamous for his remarkably uncomfortable demeanor. With that said, Mark was dressed uncharacteristically formal, wearing what the New York Times called his "I'm sorry" suit. It was a relief to lawmakers, though, who were worried he was going to show up in his "fuck you" flip-flops like in the movie. The day prior, Trump's former chief economic advisor remarked, "Is he going to wear a suit and tie and clean white shirt? That's my biggest question. Is he going to behave like an adult? As a major corporate leader? Or give me this phony baloney, what is it, hoodies and dungarees?" Wearing a suit was so uncommon for him that Obama had even bragged about being the guy who got Mark to wear a jacket and tie. You can probably count the amount of times he has on your hands. Now, there's another important component to the Mark Zuckerberg t-shirt lore that we've ignored thus far. That being the designer himself, Bruno Cucinelli. While Zuckerberg was his first major customer from Silicon Valley, he was far from his last. In fact, he came to be universally loved throughout the scene. In 2019, a group of tech leaders went to visit his hometown in Italy. That included Jeff Bezos, LinkedIn co-founder Reid Hoffman, and Dropbox co-founder Drew Houston. By that point, his company was earning $500 million a year, which he used for what he called humanistic capitalism. Bruno lived in Solomeo, a remote village located between Florence and Rome. Many describe it as idyllic and picturesque, a stark contrast to where his clients resided. While there's a lot of villages like this throughout Italy, it was a dying breed. Be it for urbanization, poverty, or the young leaving, these places had effectively become ghost towns. In a 2016 census, it had been reported that nearly 2,500 rural Italian villages had been abandoned. Because of this, Bruno had decided to use his fortune to prevent that from happening to Solomeo. He tore down the old warehouse that cluttered the valley, and grew trees there instead. He built a 240-seat theater in the heart of the village to encourage arts. He refurbished the town's church and its 14th century castle. The latter was then turned into a school to preserve the traditions and crafts of the village. And those are only some of the changes he's made to restore the village's former glory. Bruno was able to change the lives of nearly everyone around him. And that was, at least in part, due to Mark Zuckerberg's fixation on wearing the same t-shirt every day. In 2018, Mark Zuckerberg showed off his first new outfit in over 10 years. He wore a navy blue crewneck sweater at the year's conference. While there's no clear reason behind this change, he's since stayed consistent with this new item. And I can't say for sure that the following had any impact on his shift from gray t-shirts, but it's worth mentioning as a possibility. You see, in 2020, Stephen Levy published his book, Facebook: The Inside Story. It gives insight to the inner workings of the company from hundreds of interviews both inside and outside Facebook, and that included his obsession with gray t-shirts. The book claims that Zuckerberg is obsessed with his public image, which, you know, there's definitely been so many incidents then that just left him completely molding. But there is one particular incident that changed everything. An onstage interview in 2010. While talking with a tech journalist about the company's privacy policies, he began sweating profusely. The sheer amount of moisture dripping from his face was insane. He was like one of those horrifying ultra-detailed panels from Ren and Stimpy or SpongeBob. And at that point, that was probably the biggest incident that had happened, with just massive amounts of people mocking his appearance. Reportedly, this led him to freak out because, as the post puts it, he wants to look cool and dry instead of sweaty and nervous. After this, Mark begins having assistants make sure that his famed gray t-shirts are immaculate backstage. And more bizarrely, he instructed employees to blow dry his sweaty armpits before major events. It's a little stinker. When reached for comment, a Facebook spokesperson told Business Insider, "I doubt this is true, and if so, it would have been at our communications team's request. But surely anyone who has ever worn a gray t-shirt can relate." So she basically said, it's probably not true, but if it was, wouldn't that make sense? I'm just saying, if he's worried about sweating through his clothes, maybe a darker color is the move. Ever since then, Mark has rarely been seen in his iconic gray tee. But perhaps his new outfit was related to the company's changes in priorities toward VR. The closest we've come to him addressing fashion again would be in the context of the metaverse. Last summer, they hosted a virtual fashion show to promote digital versions of high-end designer clothing. Yeah, the guy who wears the same clothes every single day wants you to spend your money buying a ton of fake clothes for your avatar. There, Zook's character can be seen wearing designs from Balenciaga, Prada, and Thom Browne. And one image includes this little schoolboy outfit that just completely horrifying. This outfit should come with a sailor hat and an oversized lollipop. But all that just goes back to the fact that Mark Zuckerberg has no time for such trivial earthly decisions. But anyway, that's the legend of Mark Zuckerberg's t-shirt. Let me ask you something. Which fast food place do you think has the best fries? God, asking that, it makes me feel like I'm one of those children's YouTubers that has like the Mr. Beast style captions and whatnot. I know this is one of those generic engagement bait questions that makes up 99% of the content posted to Threads, but it's actually very relevant to this video. Personally, I'm thinking maybe Five Guys, although I know some people don't really count Five Guys as fast food because it's a little pricier. And I saw when Charlie made his tier list, he had picked Popeyes. And he also had Taco Bell in the top tier, which I actually never had Taco Bell fries before. Popeyes, though, is a solid answer I hadn't even considered. I feel like though the vast majority of the time this question comes up in real life, people say McDonald's. And hearing people say McDonald's has the best fries always kinda pains me. Because I mean, the McDonald's fries that I grew up with, yeah, 100% absolutely. That era of McDonald's fries was just untouchable. But those fries they got now, the ones they've had for a couple decades, those are not McDonald's fries. They suck. I mean, they're better than Burger King fries, but they're not good. And I know this is not just nostalgia talking. It's not just memories of half my little baggie of fries winding up underneath the car seat. These fries changed in horrible ways. And it's all happened because of one man. So today, we're gonna take a look at the story of Phil Sokolov, the man who ruined McDonald's fries. Despite being known as a burger place, depending on who you ask, it's really McDonald's fries that made them. Their self-described founder, Ray Kroc, wrote as much in his memoir. The quality of our fries was a large part of McDonald's success. One of my suppliers told me, "Ray, you know you aren't in the hamburger business at all. You're in the French fry business. I don't know how the living hell you do it, but you've got the best French fries in town, and that's what's selling folks on your place." And all that came tumbling down because of one man named Phil Sokolov. Born in 1922, Phil always had a desire to be the center of attention. He took up tap dancing at the age of 6, placing first at the local talent show. It was the start of a showmanship that took a different turn 3 years later. The boy learned how to sing, impressing family at weddings and bar mitzvahs. He dreamed of being a vocalist, but was stuck working at his father's fruit market. That only changed after high school when he was able to leave Nebraska and pursue a singing career. His next 4 years were on the road with a succession of different bands. They performed in ballrooms and nightclubs across the country. Phil embraced this lifestyle until turning 21, when it felt like it was time to settle down. He returned to his home state in search of a stable source of income. This took him to construction, where he built houses, sometimes 2 at a time, off speculation. It was during one of these jobs that he realized suppliers were overcharging. That meant that he could easily undercut his only 2 competitors. This culminated in 1955 with the launch of Phillips Manufacturing Company. It was such a success that the venture ultimately made him a millionaire, and these profits only soared as the company grew over the next 10 years. By all accounts, this man was already set for life as he got married and started his family. It seemed like there was nothing in the way of his comfortable retirement. But then it happened. On October 27th, 1966, Phil suffered from a heart attack. Given its mortality rate at the time, the 44-year-old survival was something to celebrate. Yet he couldn't get over the fact that it had happened at all. Phil elaborated on this dilemma in an interview. "I was thin. I did the Royal Canadian Air Force exercises every day. I ran a mile every day, under 7 minutes. My blood pressure was low. I didn't smoke. I knew how to handle stress. I had a wonderful wife and a happy marriage." Phil was in otherwise good health, which made this heart attack seem random. That is until he consulted a doctor who warned about cholesterol. Cholesterol is a fatty substance used for many essential functions of the body. It's harmful in excess as it can build up in the arteries. His levels were dangerously high at 300 milligrams per deciliter. This, as it turns out, was a reflection of the patient's poor diet. He was addicted to hamburgers, hot dogs, and anything greasy. Upon learning this, Phil was prescribed a low-fat diet, and it lowered his count by half. This completely changed the entrepreneur's attitude towards life. He obsessively researched this subject on his own. By the end, he knew enough about this topic that he would proclaim himself an amateur cardiologist, which tells me that in the modern day, Phil would have been the most annoying type of Reddit commenter. This information stuck with him for years, informing all of his decisions about how to eat. However, for now, it was just limited to his own life, as this was early research. It's important to recognize that at this point in time, there is still a lot of debate over its connection to heart disease.
This was the 80s, man.
That continued until the publication of a 10-year-long study in January of 1984. It was the first conclusive evidence that lowering cholesterol could prevent heart disease. It found across 4,000 men that lowering cholesterol by 25% cut the risk of a heart attack by half. This paper was sponsored by the federal government and came with dietary guidelines. It recommended a lower intake of cholesterol as well as fats and saturated fats. There was fear over the fact that the average American's cholesterol level was well over 210. This was met with backlash from companies who felt this was poor publicity for their products. Phil saw this as an opportunity for him to take initiative, to both save lives and to honor his late wife Ruth. Ruth had passed 2 years earlier after a 15-year struggle with cancer. In spite of this, she managed to raise 2 kids and founded a school for blind children. Her resilience taught him to be more empathetic to the health of others. He drew $1 million from his personal bank to form the National Heart Savers Association. The goal was simple, to draw attention to the dangers of high cholesterol. During the next 4 years, NHSA sponsored free testing for 200,000 people across the United States. That included more than 10,000 congressional staff and members of Congress. In 1988, Phil successfully lobbied to designate April as Know Your Cholesterol Month. This resulted in a historic record for cholesterol tests. His efforts were paying off, but he never got a response from the industry. A month later, he sent 11,000 letters to food processors asking them to stop using tropical oils. These letters were inflammatory, calling them accessories to death, and threatening a media campaign. Few bothered to respond though, and those that did were very dismissive. With their position made clear, he followed up on his threats, purchasing a series of full-page ads that October. The headline declared it as "The Poisoning of America" in giant bold text. He identified the culprits as 10 of the world's leading manufacturers. It warned the public that their lives were at stake, with an assortment of America's favorite foods. The ads were placed in several major newspapers with a campaign that cost about $140,000. They incited a reaction so intense that it surprised even Phil. He was quickly inundated with threats from corporate executives and their lawyers. Many attempted to fight publicly, calling him a quack and irresponsible, but his sales plummeted. They began to concede, with all 10 of them agreeing to use vegetable oils by January. Phil succeeded and was hailed by the public as an underdog. I feel that I have developed a rapport with the American public. They like the fact that a little guy in Omaha is sitting here and taking on Nabisco, a $25 billion corporation. I've had some success, and I've made a lot of money, but compared with Nabisco, I'm a pimple on an elephant's fanny. Not only that, but his motivation literally came from the heart. He frequently spoke of the heart attack that came after eating too much fast food. It was just a matter of time before it became the focus of his crusade. And this brings us back to McDonald's. Beef tallow is a rendered form of beef fat used as both an ingredient and for cooking. It was a staple to the franchise as part of their elusive Formula 47. This secret recipe entails a special mix of beef tallow and oil blend. It dates back to the brand's inception, being used to fry the very potatoes Kroc fell in love with. Of course, the saturated fat now proved controversial amid these health concerns. Many chains, including McDonald's, had already begun to fry some products with vegetable oil. But that change was far from universal, with potatoes always made an exception. This self-admittedly came down to a matter of taste, as the fries were much more temperamental. That of course didn't suffice, as Phil took aim at the figurehead. McDonald's is the leader, and consequently, when you say McDonald's, you are including Burger King and Wendy's. It may seem like a Herculean task, but by then he'd already spent $2 million for the NHSA. So on April 4th, 1990, Phil launched another wave of attacks. The Poisoning of America Part 3. They focused on the nutrition of the restaurant's hamburgers while promoting a call to action. It called on them to cut beef tallow and lower the fat of their meat by 10% to give our kids a break today. McDonald's was quick to rebuke the PSA, claiming he was spreading misinfo. Their lawyer even warned outlets not to reprint the ad. That request fell on deaf ears, instead being thrown out to the public. And his message had a demonstrable effect on consumers. A poll revealed that 38% decreased their intake of fast food in response. That was reflected in the response of companies even early on. In spite of their rebuttal, McDonald's pledged to provide good nutrition. They test-marketed grilled chicken sandwiches, pasta, and celery sticks. Low-fat options were also added at the beginning of May. However, they were adamant about keeping their special mix of beef tallow, which sparked another wave of ads in July. Their stock began to fall. The pressure was mounting, and only getting worse as one by one their competitors folded. And ultimately, it proved to be too much. Eventually, McDonald's was forced to follow in their footsteps. On July 23rd, McDonald's announced it would ditch its original recipe. This was in favor of a blend of corn and cottonseed oil. Absolute garbage. And it was all just as Phil predicted. Soon enough, the entire industry changed its way. This was only the beginning of a continuous effort to slim down fast food. Chains began introducing all kinds of healthy alternatives to their usual burgers and fries. And McDonald's never credited Phil with this change. They claimed their decision was the result of an 8-year-long study. This apparent breakthrough was supposed to be a way to preserve the French fries taste. Which, if you've ever had the original recipe, you know that is absolute nonsense. I'm not stating an unpopular opinion here. If you've ever had them before, a lot of people will tell you that nothing compares to those old McDonald's fries. You even had an episode of Malcolm Gladwell's podcast, Revisionist History, where in 2017, he dedicated an episode to the signature flavor, the old signature flavor. This was put to task with a blind taste test, in which a set of millennials was asked which they prefer. The subjects voted unanimously for the beef tallow fries. This was similar to the motivations of Luke Fader for Atlas Obscura. In 2020, he wrote about his hunt for the original French fry recipe. This search took him up the corporate ladder, as well as less conventional sources, fast food experts, museum curators, a 79-year-old employee from the very first McDonald's. It was through this investigation that he found that one recipe purported to be the true one by a historian was in fact the real deal. It was part of an unlicensed McMenu PDF that offered methods from the 50s to 70s. Though its author remains anonymous, they claim to have managed a franchise while the McRib was being developed, which places it before 1981. Well before the NHSA campaign. Luke cooked several batches and even fed it to someone who had eaten McDonald's back in the day. It was accurate enough to bring back memories from the man's childhood. The author then reviews it himself with glowing praise. The McMenu PDF fries pack a serious punch that left my palate screaming for more. A subtle, beefy umami saddled neatly next to the underlying sweetness from brining. The crisp, browned edges provided an audible crunch. The insides retained a sweet, buttery texture. My only complaint was that I had to stop eating and photograph them. They are hands down the best fast food fries that I've ever eaten. The instructions are available in his article for anyone who's interested in trying the recipe for themselves. With all that said, this isn't even close to the end of the story. There is intense debate over regulations for detailed ingredient labels. It was to be made mandatory with the Nutrition Labeling and Education Act of 1990. The bill passed the House of Representatives but languished in the Senate. That was largely due to the protests of food processors. Because of this, Phil ran $650,000 in national ads calling for the public to act, and they overwhelmingly did, to the point that he was credited with the eventual passing of the bill. The bill's author, Representative Henry Waxman of California, said, "His ads played such an important role in educating the public and the Congress. What he was able to do on his own as an individual is an inspiration. This bill is a tribute to his tenacity. He'd wear this as his greatest achievement, helping fill aisles with nutrition labels." Following this, his public profile was reduced with most of his efforts taking place behind the scenes. Those days as an outsider were over. His calls were always transferred to top executives they knew by first name. There were some notable exceptions to this though. He later argued against 2% milk, encouraging parents to buy skim instead. In 1997, he urged Michael Jordan and Tiger Woods not to endorse McDonald's. And throughout it all, he remained a local celebrity, being invited to sing at the Omaha Press Club.
Diet fads are extreme, they are difficult dreams. You will find eating lean keeps your arteries clean, and life gets more exciting with each passing day.
His last ad came in 2002. It was to discourage fellow Omaha native Warren Buffett from buying Burger King. The sheer commitment showed it wasn't a bluff, when he claimed he had enough money to carry on indefinitely. 2 years later, Phil Sokoloff passed away at the age of 82. His eulogies revealed that he'd spent $15 million in the fight against fat and cholesterol. They remember him as a crusader, willing to sacrifice his personal fortune for the good of the public. But as we approach the present day, many have started to question whether or not he'd actually done more harm than good. By this time, much of the research that he cited has been discredited as pseudoscience. Originally, this research was propped up due to manipulation by the sugar industry. In 2016, an article was published in JAMA regarding documents from the 1960s. It found that research had been funded to downplay the risks of sugar and highlight the dangers of fat. This wasn't disclosed when their findings were published in 1967. They then minimized studies that suggested sugar's role in heart disease. The Sugar Research Foundation paid to have them discredited in a literature review. For example, a study that found benefits when people picked vegetables over sugar. This was dismissed as the dietary change wasn't feasible. and these efforts allowed them to influence the overall scientific discourse. If that wasn't bad enough, the vegetable oils that Phil championed were heavy in trans fats. These artificial fats were far worse in relation to cholesterol, which of course you might remember caused its own scare. It escalated to the point that in 2008, McDonald's switched again to ease the fears of heart disease. They currently use a mix of oils that lacked these fats, but there is evidence of this being the case as far back as 1956. By the time Phil's ads ran, the scientific community was well aware of the dangers of trans fats, yet he continued to blame saturated fat for his heart attack. The impact of his campaign is felt to this day, with many still believing in the same low-fat rhetoric. Despite all this though, I do think that he really believed the things that he said, and that he really thought that he was doing what was best for the world. But the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And unfortunately, that cost us the best fries ever. So yeah, I got a personal message for Ronald McDonald. Ditch the vegetable oils, get rid of the seed oils, bring back the beef tallow fries. Anyway, that's the story of why McDonald's fries suck now. When you think about metal and crime, your mind probably goes to a very specific kind of place. You'll think of things like Pat O'Brien, Cannibal Corpse's now former guitarist, who charged at a police officer with a knife while shouting, "The rapture is coming," all while his stockpile of weapons and human skulls is on fire. Or how about Tim Lambesis of As LA Dying, who tried to hire a hitman to kill his wife? And then there's Varg. So when people heard that the administrator of the Crazy Ass Moments in Nu Metal History Twitter account was facing potentially 25 years in prison, their expectations were completely subverted when they saw that it wasn't for any kind of weapons or murder or anything like that. Rather, it was for securities fraud. So for today's video, let's take a look at the he said she said bullshit of Holiday Kirk going to jail. The Twitter account Crazy Ass Moments in Nu Metal History started in April of 2022. It was one of many accounts that was inspired by crazy ass moments in American politics. After that account went viral, it would wind up spawning a bunch of different gimmick accounts documenting crazy ass moments in various niches. With Crazy Ass Moments in Nu Metal History, of course, documenting crazy ass moments in nu metal history. In addition to posting classic nu metal music videos, new entries into the genre, and bands whose nu metalness is still hotly debated, you'd also get posts like, the time Darren from System of a Down was interviewed by a magazine at a festival who had no idea that he was Darren from System of a Down. A baby whose parents intended to name her Cora but accidentally named her Corn. Fred Durst showing off his Ayanami Ray figure. Over the course of the next year or so, this account grows a sizable following. A mix of people enjoying the nostalgia, cringing at the old days, and also a lot of people getting into this kind of music for the first time. And as the account gains traction, Holiday Kirk, the man behind the account, starts to branch out into other ventures. He's writing articles about nu metal on his website and eventually grows out into a news site called Nu Metal Agenda with an accompanying podcast, in which musicians, both new and old, address the nu metal allegations. Because, you know, the label nu metal has always had such a negative connotation that you even had bands like Korn and Slipknot denying that they're nu metal. He starts doing live events. He makes a project to retrieve nu metal lost media, which, with the help of Rainbow Knife, successfully finds a band called Simon Says and gets their music on streaming services for the first time. And while all this is going on, an interesting shift starts to happen. According to Google Trends, interest in nu metal has now exceeded its previous peak in 2004, when Google began tracking. 2004 basically being the end of when nu metal was originally relevant. You start to see a bunch of articles getting published about the nu metal revival, which point to Kirk as a central figure in the revival of the genre. And in general, he's just a pretty non-controversial guy, which made it all that more shocking for people to hear that he was facing jail time. It was on October 31st, Halloween, that he posted the following. This account may enter a period of inactivity as I'm being indicted for securities fraud at 4 p.m. tomorrow. Stay tuned for further updates. Now, he's made joke tweets like this in the past, so to me, and probably most of the people who saw the tweet at that point, we just figured it was a joke. But then the next few exchanges start to sell people on it. What led up to this? WTF? According to the state of California, securities fraud. Wait, hold up, what? I'm being indicted for securities fraud tomorrow. Wait, what's happening tomorrow? My indictment for securities fraud. This is so nu metal in every aspect. It really isn't. I'm facing 25 years. Oh, so it's metalcore then. At this point now, I've got people sending me messages and tagging me asking to find out what's going on. Also, I had someone advise me to not listen to anything he tells me because apparently doing so could potentially cause me to get sucked up into the case. I don't know if that's true or not, that's just what I'm told. In any case, now you start to get more people who think his tweet isn't a joke after all, it's really happening. I see a few people theorizing that maybe it's a crypto scam because, he's a podcaster with a big Twitter account. So, not entirely an unreasonable assumption. But then something else happens that you would never in a million years see coming, and this is what really, really starts to sell people. Crazy ass moments in fictitious brokerage accounts. I've been advised not to speak on the details of this case at this time. Thank you. 4 men indicted for defrauding global financial services company based in Menlo Park, California of over $2 million. That's right, there actually was a real securities fraud case that was unsealed within hours of Kirk's post, with the alleged crime occurring in California, where Kirk lives. In this case, 4 men had been charged with securities fraud and money laundering. To keep it very brief, what they were basically doing is taking advantage of instant deposits, which allow you to trade with funds before your money clears from the bank. But the bank accounts they would use for these deposits were almost empty. So the financial institutions would front the money with the expectation that the money's coming back, but then the money doesn't come back. And they would use stock options to transfer the instant deposit money to good bank accounts and keep it. It also named the 4 men charged: Eduardo Hernandez, also known as Ghost; Christopher Flagg, also known as Venus; Daquan Lloyd, also known as Payday; Corey Ortiz, also known as Jefe. Now, as far as I know, nobody knows Kirk's last name, and for that matter, Kirk could be a pseudonym. But I don't know, man, you look at Kirk, he doesn't strike me as a Hernandez or an Ortiz. Certainly not a Daquan. Christopher Flagg, maybe? I mean, he could be a Christopher Flagg. But at this point, there's no pictures of the men available. He doesn't post anything else until the next day. It's been the honor of a lifetime administrating this account. Thank you for everything. Goodbye. And attached is a photo of the Los Angeles Superior Court. And as the band Cheem pointed out, there's no Google reverse image search of this, so it's probably a picture he took himself. Although honestly, I can't remember the last time Google reverse image search actually gave me what I was looking for, so now between these posts and his uncharacteristic lack of other posts, now you have people who originally thought it was a bit thinking, hey, maybe this actually is a real thing. Now you've got millions of views on these posts, with a lot of people convinced that the admin of the crazy ass moments in Nu Metal History account might actually be going to jail for white collar crimes. Although in this period, you do have a few people who put the pieces together. Several pointed out that this particular courthouse that he showed isn't the court that this case would be tried in. There's also the YouTuber Toastify, who calculated based on previous tweets that Kirk's age would not match up with any of the defendants. But it doesn't really matter who's saying what to the contrary. You do have a lot of people playing along with it just because the idea of it is pretty funny. But then you had so many people who were just genuinely convinced. Like, I can't remember the last time I had this many people message me to cover a story as it's unfolding. And then after that courthouse picture, we've got radio silence for another day. But then on November 2nd, Crazy Ass Moments in Nu Metal History would do a free Kirk stream. Of course, Kirk didn't need to be freed because he was there in the stream.
Yes. Yeah! So, rumors about my demise have been greatly exaggerated. I'd like to explain my thought process for making this post. I was sitting right here and I thought to myself, wouldn't it be funny to post this account may enter a period of inactivity as I am being indicted for securities fraud at 4 p.m. tomorrow. Stay tuned for further updates. This indictment dropped on October 31st, the exact same day, almost at the exact same time. And listener, viewer, I want you to know right now, I am not that clever. I'm pretty clever, but I'm definitely not clever enough to time out my big fib, with an actual Department of Justice case. Okay.
He would clarify once again on Twitter. For anyone checking in, I want to be crystal clear about this, because I am not in the business of lying. I'm good. The whole thing was a bit. It was a blast, but it's time to get back to the task at hand, which is platforming nu metal bands, young and old, that deserve the attention. I spoke to Kirk a bit after this, and it was basically just as I thought. Originally, he was just making a throwaway joke tweet, and then it just suddenly got way out of control. All because, by sheer dumb luck, the thing he was joking about wound up actually happening, just to other people. He made the tweet and had zero intention of actually making this a bit that runs for a few days, but then he saw literally millions of people are getting weirdly invested in this. So he said, fuck it, let's have some fun. I guess on one hand it's a bit of a disappointing ending, but at the same time it's not, because I'm glad Kirk's not in jail. But anyway, that's the story of nu metal securities fraud. In 1996, a doom metal band from Moldova named Inferialis released a demo tape including 2 songs, Broken Piece of the Sun and It Was a Yarn. Despite their limited discography, they managed to build quite a reputation for themselves before ultimately splitting up in 1998. But that's not where the story ends. Soon after, 2 members of this band, the vocalist Petru and their keyboardist Dan, would go on to form a Europop group named Ozone. Among this pop group's many accomplishments, perhaps their greatest, was creating the track behind what was perhaps the most famous viral video of the mid-2000s. What I'm talking about, of course, is Numa Numa. So for today's episode, let's take a closer look at Numa Numa, what happened to it, and some little mysteries surrounding its origin that always puzzled me. Believe it or not, I've actually been enjoying TikTok for the past year or so. I mean, for sure, there's a lot of absolute garbage on there, but you use a little bit and the algorithm figures out what you want to watch pretty quickly. And it's fun to be able to make different kinds of content that don't really fit on this channel. That being said, one thing that I never understood with TikTok, the whole lip syncing thing. I just don't understand the appeal of mouthing yourself, singing songs, or even more like lip syncing, mouthing yourself, doing dialogue for movies and shit like that. But then I got to thinking about how that sort of content has a pedigree that goes back way further than TikTok or even Musical.ly. I'm talking all the way back to 2004. It was that year that a fella named Gary Brolsma, who had a reputation of whipping up kooky videos for his friends, had another one up his sleeve. Numa Numa. A video that in some way is kind of like the first TikTok. Featuring, of course, Gary dancing and lip-syncing to the Moldovan pop song Dragostea din Ta by Ozone. He never intended for anybody to see this outside of his group of friends. But then one day, a week after he made it, he decides to upload it to Newgrounds for shits and giggles. He figures it'll get downloaded to oblivion, never to be seen again. Of course, as you most certainly know, he was very wrong. It accumulates millions and millions of views, eventually becoming the Guinness Book of World Records holder for the most popular internet video, spawning several imitations and parodies of its own, each of them often gaining millions of views on their own. And this all propels Gary to being, at this point in time, the most famous guy from a meme. But before we get to the rest of Gary's story, there's something else that's always puzzled me about this. Despite this song not having been popular in the US before the Numa Numa meme, despite me having no connection whatsoever to Moldova or Romania, I knew that I had heard this song before that. If I recall correctly, at the time, I was a big fan of J-pop groups like Morning Musume and all their little offshoots. I know, I'm a huge weeb, we've gone over this before. And somehow, I had downloaded this song, the Numa Numa song, Dragostea din Ta, as part of a collection of J-pop songs. It doesn't make much sense because, Romania is not a part of Japan. But thinking about it, it was also likely to me that Gary, also an American with no connection to Moldova, but also a person who is presumably very online, probably found the song in a similar way. But how exactly does this happen? So, after exiting the Moldovan metal scene in 1998, Dan Balin, formerly of the doom metal band Inferialis, creates his pop group Ozone because, believe it or not, he likes money, and it works. I mean, the first album does kinda whatever, but then they move to Bucharest, Romania, and the second album kills it. This leads to their third album, Disco Zone, which contains Dragostea din Ta, at release in 2003, their biggest hit to date. #1 in Romania, and it gets releases all across Europe and eventually makes its way to Japan, where it's known as Koi no Mayahi. And with that Japanese release, this song has its first entanglement with meme culture, on Japan's 2-channel image board. So on 2-channel, there is a cat meme, Mona. Even if you're not Japanese, it's very possible that you've seen it around. And part of the character's popularity involved dance animations set to music. One such animation will be made by a user named Ikari using Koi no Mayahi. And as it turns out in a later interview, Gary did reveal that he had first heard the song in a Japanese cat animation. vindicating my theory of the weeb to Numa Numa pipeline. But that reveal was much further down the line, as initially after the popularity of Numa Numa, Gary wasn't so inclined to do interviews. When Numa Numa popped off, it almost felt kind of like a sequel to the Star Wars Kid, which had gone viral a year prior. Hell, Gary and the Star Wars Kid even kind of looked a bit alike. And if you watched my Star Wars Kid video, you know that the Star Wars Kid wasn't too happy about that meme. In fact, he hated it and wanted to do whatever he could to escape from it. And at first, Gary was in the same boat. In an article by the New York Times shortly after the video blew up, it discusses how Gary spent his time moping around his house, having canceled all the appearances he was initially happy to make. These days, Mr. Brolsma shuttles between the house and his job at Staples, his family said. He is distraught, embarrassed. His grandmother, Margaret Telkis, quoted him as saying just the other day, "I want this to end." It puzzled a lot of the people around him because previously he was always making videos trying to entertain people. For example, they mentioned these parodies of Prozac commercials that he used to make, which I guess is at this point a piece of Numa Numa lost media. Perhaps it was a case of the dog who finally caught the car and didn't know what to do with it. But his friends and family were encouraging him to try and live this up. One of his friends told him, "This is your one chance to be famous, embrace it." While his grandfather simply remarked, "I don't know what's wrong with him." A comment from Gary's friend Randall would highlight another aspect of the story. "He's been entertaining us for years," he said. So, it's kind of like the rest of the world is realizing that Gary can make you smile. And over the course of the next year, it was this sentiment that would prevent the story from being Star Wars Kid Part 2. When retelling the course of the year after Numa Numa, Gary would mention that it was messages from fans that helped pull him out of this funk. In particular, he recalled a message from a soldier in the Middle East who had mentioned how Numa Numa had helped brighten up his mood. And through that, Gary realized that this isn't something he should be trying to run away from, but rather something he should embrace. And thus, he decided to lean back into it, leading to his return in September of 2006. That's when he released Numa Numa, aka Numa Numa 2. This song, written by a songwriter named Chad Russell in Russian with lyrics that are about a children's song about a hunter and a bunny, lays the base for Gary to Numa Numa once again. Now with cameo appearances by the members of his band The Nowadays, who had themselves just released a pair of songs on MySpace. I'm not gonna lie, when this song first came out, it kind of felt like that episode of The Simpsons where Homer bowls a perfect game and he just can't let it go. But in the years following the release of this song, I've found that the new Numa Numa, hey, like that gets stuck in my head way more than the original song does. Gary also held a $45,000 Numa contest in which it was up to the viewers to create their own Numa Numa videos to go with the new Numa. It would receive 328 entries in total, with the grand prize winner Keith3D, who actually bears a little bit of a resemblance to Gary himself, creating a video with stop-motion animation of pretzels and various household objects. And in the coming years, Gary would expand his scope outside the realm of music. It was on October 1st of 2008 that Gary would announce the next phase of his career with this video.
Don't do it. Oh, no. Ow.
Ladies and gentlemen, comedy is saved. The Numa Network has arrived. And now it wasn't just Gary, but Gary and friends. A cast of characters like Dr. Depend, Christy Storms, and Tobias. In fact, most of the Numa Network videos involve these other characters with only occasional appearances by Gary. And of course, predictably, the Gary videos were by far the most viewed ones on the channel. By 2010, Gary was speaking in interviews about how he wanted to expand the scope of the Numa Network, creating a site that was something he compared to Funny or Die, or College Humor. And indeed, a website was created containing articles and celebrity interviews and stuff like that, although not much of it has been archived. All things considered, I think it's actually pretty impressive how long he kept the ball rolling on this. It remained active until 2013, with the last official Numa Network video being a very brief interview with James Hong. I mean, I think to go from owning literally the most viewed video that existed online to, you know, a few thousand views here and there, I think most people would give up in a week or less. But Gary kept this project going for 5 years. But it makes sense when you remember that before Numa Numa, this was a guy who's just happy to make videos that only his friends were ever supposed to see. Then there's a little bit of a weird shift from that point on. The channel suddenly becomes something called Dork Daily, beginning with a sketch called How to Use a Public Restroom. Then there's an interview with Malcolm in the middle, and a few years passed until their next sketch in November of 2016, the top 5 ways to change your Facebook friends' political positions. This obviously got much more of a reaction, especially with it being 2016, with people wondering why Numa Numa is suddenly doing politics. People had theories that the channel had been hacked or stolen or purchased by some kind of mega corporation, but Dork Daily replied to such comments, directing people to Gary's current website and saying that this project was a labor of love that didn't make any money, nor was it intended to. And in fact, the Dork Daily iteration of the Numa network still continues to this day, with several videos released the month of me making this video, and with a website containing general geek culture news and editorials. As for Gary himself, he's still pretty actively making music, including new songs by the Nowadays, a solo album entitled Haunted House of Pancakes, and probably my favorite of the stuff he's produced, these videos on YouTube that are represented just by a Shrek picture and an emoji. These songs have a very Super NES type feel. In particular, they remind me a lot of Tokimeki Memorial or Sailor Moon Another Story, so if that's your vibe, definitely worth checking out. Oh, and how could I forget, of course, there's a Numa Numa NFT. It was sold in June of 2021 by NetGems. In a brief interview with BuzzFeed, he explains that despite the massive popularity of Numa Numa, like a lot of other early internet stars, he barely made any money at all throughout the years off of this. And he mentioned that currently his family was struggling with financial issues and health issues, so he was hoping that the NFT could help them make ends meet. Ultimately, this NFT would sell to a user named Worth for 3.15 Ethereum, which at the time of me making this video is a little over $4,000. Worth is now trying to sell the Numa Numa NFT for 420 Ethereum, a little over $1.7 million. Not sure how that's gonna work out, but we'll see. In any case, Gary Brolsma, the Numa Numa guy, is a rare example of an early internet celebrity who managed to maintain a presence throughout the years without completely losing his mind, so hats off to him and good luck to his family. But anyway, that's the story for now. If you like this video, check out my video about the God Warrior. I'm out.